Right, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers. Welcome to the Planning Committee. In the interests of safety, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Please do not attempt to use the lifts. Assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust fire marshal regulations, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. For those of you who have not attended this committee before, I will explain the running order for this afternoon. After committee members have declared their interests and agreed the minutes of the previous meeting, I will announce each item and ask those of you who are here to make a deputation to come and to sit at the table. After the planning officer has made the presentation for the application, individual deputies will have 6 minutes to express their views, and joint deputies will have 12 minutes between them to make their views known. After which, you will take no further part in the proceedings unless we need to ask a question to clarify a statement that has been made. Members will then ask questions, make comments, and the decision on the application will be made. Both members of the committee and members of the public are reminded of the need to consider material planning matters and not to refer to any personal information about other members of the public. I will certainly stop you if you do. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of those making deputations, but there will be some footage of those making deputations as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Finally, may I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking. You do that by pressing down on the right-hand button until the red light comes on. And the red light it comes on, you are being recorded. Before we move any further, I think it would be sensible for those of you who are in the public gallery to know who we are. I will start off going around the table. I am Councillor Hugh Mason, Councillor for St Jude Ward, and I am the chairman.
I'm Kieran Laven, I'm the planning solicitor.
I'm Jane Dodino, local democracy officer.
Judith Smythe, Councillor for St Jude Ward and Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Central Southsea Ward.
Councillor Claire Udy, Charles Dickens Ward.
Luke Stubbs, Eastern Craigswater.
Donna Jones, Hilsey Ward.
Joe Hooper, representing Paulsgrove Ward.
Rob Wood, St Thomas.
Alan Banting, DM Team Leader.
Stephen Flynn, Highways.
Peter Hayward, Highways.
Claire Upton Brown, Head of Planning.
Right, thank you. First of all, do we have any apologies for absence?
I don't think it's going to go on this long, but I need to be gone by 5.
Councillor Donna Jones.
I can better that. I need to leave at 2:30. Sorry.
Oh dear. Councillor Steve Pitt.
Yes, Councillor Tom Wood, who has a blood test at the hospital.
Right. Councillor Rob Wood.
Sorry, Chair, I will also have to leave early, around about 4ish, if we carry on that long.
Well, that, gentlemen and ladies, rests in your hands. Yes.
Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Horton, and I believe Councillor Wood is standing in for her. Thanks.
Right. Councillor Jones.
And as of yesterday, Councillor Gemma New is now a full member of this committee, but because she was only put onto it yesterday at full council, she's not been able to arrange childcare in time, so we also have her apologies as well.
Right. Thank you very much. Declarations of members' interest. Do members have any financial interest to declare? Councillor Stubbs.
Well, it's certainly not a financial interest. Don't know if I need to declare it at all, but I will, which is on application number 4. I know the former landlord when it was operating as a pub, but I don't think that's an interest.
Thank you. Councillor Pitt.
As is widely known, I used to run the licensed premises on the opposite corner to it, but I have no pecuniary interest in that, and the building was sold long ago.
Thank you. Right. You have in front of you the minutes of our meeting, which was held on the 19th of September. I will take those for accuracy. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Thank you very much, members. I will therefore sign these as a correct record of the meeting. Are there any matters arising which do not appear elsewhere on the agenda? No. Thank you very much. We now move on to updates on previous planning applications by the Assistant Director of City Development.
Chair, there are no updates this afternoon.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we now move to our first substantial item, which is the Moneyfield Sports and Social Club. Members will remember that this was deferred last time for additional information. When it comes to questions, I should be grateful, given the pressure on some of the members here, if you would not repeat some of the matters which were discussed at the last meeting. The other thing before we start is that if a specific reference is made to viability, the viability study, we can discuss this in general terms, but if people want to discuss the actual financial elements of that viability study, we will need to go into closed session. With that, can I ask the officer to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. There is some information on your update sheets. I also need to mention a typographical error by me. Top of page 32 references 2 hours of community use and says 8 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it should be 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So sorry for that. I'll go through obviously the same slides as the members would have seen at the committee on the 19th of September, but I'll try and do it a little quicker this time around. So it's a broadly rectangular and level site. It covers 2.9 hectares. Highlighted in this image is a main grass and floodlit pitch, and that part of the site is unaltered by the proposed development. This slide shows that the site is bounded by the railway line and properties in Highgate Road to the west, properties in Salcombe Avenue to the east, allotment gardens to the north, and side elevations of houses facing onto Dover Road and Martin Road at the southern end of the site across Moneyfield Avenue. Just going along the sort of bottom of the site here, there's the boxing club here, artificial pitch, there's a stand, changing facilities, car park, and the clubhouse building. In the next image is, at the top there, is those buildings, obviously from inside the site. This image shows that there is hedgerow trees running through the centre of the site, separating the main floodlit grass pitch from others to the north, and some existing tree planting lost to development up in the northwest corner of the site. Two components to the proposal. The first is a replacement sports and social club and an artificial pitch, and that is north of the existing grass pitch. The building is single storey at its southern end and 2 stories in part on that sort of northern end. And the second component of the scheme is residential development at the southern end of the site by 26 dwellings. That's 14 flats and 12 houses. Obviously, the inset plan in the corner there shows the positions from which these 3D visuals are taken. So one is essentially the sort of southern elevation of the replacement clubhouse and spectator stands, sort of viewed from the southwest. Image 2 is given more of a sort of bird's eye view, the roof and the eastern end of the site and entrances. Image 3 shows the western end of the site that would be viewed from the railway line, and image 4, the eastern end of the building, is essentially where the entrances are. So this is the replacement clubhouse in elevation. As I say, the two-storey element of the building is positioned centrally within the site, with the single-storey element to the south. This is the layout of the ground floor, showing the position of the function hall, showing the position of the entrances, gym and boxing gym, and stands at the southern end. This is an image of the first floor social club bar area, and there is a terrace, an outdoor terrace. This really isn't working terribly well, on the north elevation of the building. Some 3D visuals of the dwellings. So image 5 shows the 6 pairs of semi-detached houses. Image 6 shows the 3-storey block of flats from the entrance from Moneyfield Avenue. Image 7 is similarly showing the entrance from Moneyfield Avenue, but opposite corner on Dover Road. And image 8 shows the flats, if you like, sort of facing onto the railway line. These are the flats in elevation, mainly brickwork with a natural slate roof. These are the floor plans of the flatted development: 8 2-bed units, 6 1-bed, ranging in size from 51.3 square metres. That is the smallest one shown, Unit 2, and the largest units at 70.5 square metres are 9 and 14. The elevations of the houses, so at the top you've got what would be the street scene on Moneyfield Avenue, front and rear elevation, again predominantly brick, natural slate roof and lead dormers. This shows at the top the floor plans of the houses. They're all 4-bed. At the bottom shows the garages, 1 each to the 12 houses, and again consistent throughout the development, predominantly sort of brickwork and natural slate roofs. Right, the extract top left is from the proposals map. It shows that this is protected open space, and it's been advertised as a departure because of the impact of the development on a quarter of that open space lost to development. The purple part of this image is an extract from policy PCS 13 that seeks to protect open space from net loss unless there are wider public benefits. The planning application is supported by a range of documents, including a sporting needs and protected open space statements. The applicants summarise the wider public benefits, which are shown in the bullet points there, which are also described on page 30 of your report. The applicants include a phasing plan indicating how the development of the flats, so the purple one marked 2, would be developed first, then partial demolition of the club where it's marked 3 to facilitate access to the rear of the site, and then to develop the clubhouse pitch and houses. The applicants require the profit from all of the 26 dwellings as enabling development to subsidise the replacement sports and social club facilities and the floodlit artificial pitch. This policy extract, PCS 19, describes the normal affordable housing requirements for 30% on-site or 43% off-site, unless circumstances dictate otherwise. The applicants seek affordable housing to be put aside to enable the reprovision of the Manor Sports and Social Club, and their enabling development summary concludes the scheme would be financially unviable and not deliverable if the local planning authority insists that a financial contribution toward affordable housing is necessary. If agreement on this point cannot be reached, Moneyfield Sports and Social Club will no longer be either financially or operationally viable and will close. The club is happy to enter into a Section 106 planning obligation with the City Council to ensure that development is phased in such a manner that the club facilities are constructed at the same time as the semi-detached houses. Additionally, to allay any fears with regard to the possibility that only the residential element would be built and not the club facilities, it's proposed that the Section 106 would include caveats requiring delivery of 30% on-site affordable housing or the requisite contribution for off-site affordable housing. This shows some separation distances for the replacement building in relation to the boundaries of neighbouring properties. And there is one additional and sort of new image that I will come to in a second. Obviously, to reiterate previous advice about your decision making, it is to balance whether the replacement sports and social club and pitch with 26 dwellings as enabling development outweighs the loss of the open space and non-provision of affordable housing. Your obviously quite detailed report covers a range of other issues of significance. You deferred consideration for further discussion with the applicant regarding the wider public benefits, and the outcome of those discussions is set out in the appendix to your report. Obviously, it covers the offer of community parking. It covers a matter that will be included within the community use agreement. It covers the scenario whereby the flats will be developed and nothing else on the site, and obviously 2 other matters referencing community contact and affordable housing. In conclusions, in accordance with policy PCS 13, sorry, I did say I'll come back to this image. This is referenced, forgive me, in the update sheets. Sport England, in their consultation, had kind of 2 residual issues around fencing arrangements and around the usability of the artificial grass pitch for different formats of football. I included this image to show the overmarking that would take place on the pitch in order to satisfy their requirements. So, in accordance with policy PCS 13, the starting point is the harm resulting from building on open space that would be unacceptable unless the wider public benefits from the proposal can be demonstrated to outweigh this loss of protected open space. The applicants have presented supporting information in their protected open space statement and sporting needs statement, seeking to justify the harm from the loss of protected open space and for enabling development for 26 new dwellings to be sold on the open market to finance the replacement sports facilities without affordable housing provision by the wider public benefits. Overall, the scheme is considered, on balance, to be justified by the wider public benefits to outweigh the harm. Whilst the overall trip generation would be increased from the existing uses, the Highways Authority is satisfied that the generators of the additional traffic, namely the Football Academy and the new dwellings, will not result in an impact upon local junctions that could be deemed as material to their safe operation, and the proposed accesses are acceptable. Following modest amendment, but importantly, the quality of materials, the design is considered good enough for the site, the effect on nature conservation interests are considered capable of mitigation, and so the proposed redevelopment is considered to satisfactorily demonstrate it will contribute to achievement of a sustainable development, and the three recommendations are set out on page 40. Delegated authority to grant conditional permission subject to a 106 agreement, delegated authority to amend or add conditions where they might be necessary, and delegated authority to refuse the application if the legal agreement isn't completed within 3 months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banting. Would Mr. Pickup, Mr. Seddon and Councillor Darren Sanders please come to the table? Who's going first? Right. Mr. Pickup.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I'll keep this brief after Alan's very comprehensive report. I'd refer members to the points that we've raised in the report as being the main benefits that this development would provide. You recall from the meeting last month that it was deferred so that we could perhaps look at these benefits and expand upon those. Pete Seedon, I'm going to hand over to you, who is going to run through those as we see them. So thank you.
Mr. Seedon.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I am Pete Seedon, Director of Moneyfield Sports and Social Club and also Acting Chairman of Moneyfields FC. Following last month's committee meeting, the club has considered very carefully the councillors' comments and how it might improve the development's wider community benefit. I would like to say that the club are of the view that the current proposals would already improve significantly the club's ability to offer a wider range of social and sporting activities to the local community. However, we have looked again at our proposals and believe we can offer a few extra benefits which will address the planning committee's concerns. These relate to operating an overnight parking scheme and the free use of the all-weather pitch by community groups on 2 Sunday evenings each month. They also include the potential for affordable housing and site management. We had before and during the course of this application considered whether there was any way we could offer local residents parking. However, in the past we have experienced problems with people leaving their cars parked for days on end in our car park without being moved, which has prevented us from moving hired pitch maintenance and grass cutting machinery onto the pitch. This has caused us significant headaches and cost us a considerable amount of money over the years. We have also thought about how this might affect on-site security. At the moment, the car park is visible from Moneyfields Avenue. The proposed car park is not visible. I have spoken to some residents in Salcombe Avenue since the last meeting who have said they do not want the car park to be made public because of the opportunity it would offer to burglars getting over their back fences. They have stated that if they see someone down there after hours now, they would call the police. But if they saw someone there, if the parking is granted, they wouldn't know if they were up to no good or just parking their car. They see this as a major security and antisocial potential problem. Not one person has actually approached the club to say they would be interested in using the overnight parking. We found this a little odd. The hours on offer are between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. Monday to Thursday and 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. on Sunday. We cannot offer any more, as people paying to use the facility will expect to be able to park, so we have offered every available hour that the club is not in operation. We are happy to offer residents an overnight parking scheme as outlined in condition 13 on page 43 of the report. However, we will leave this for the committee to decide this matter. With regards to Councillor Udi's comments in the previous meeting, we have thought further about how and when we could offer less fortunate people free football. We would like to offer the use of the all-weather pitch to local community groups on 2 Sunday evenings each month between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. We have been in contact already with Claire Martin at Pompey in the community, who has said she would be happy to provide their free coaching to the kids at these times and sees it as a great long-term opportunity for the community. This would be tied up as part of the community use agreement. We also note the committee's comments about what happens if just the flats are built and nothing else. To that end, we would agree to a clause being inserted in the Section 106 agreement, which would allow the profit from the flats to be transferred to a solicitor's escrow account, to be held in that account until they are required for the implementation and construction of the clubhouse and/or weather pitch. If the clubhouse is not built, a financial contribution for the provision of off-site affordable housing will be taken from the profits and transferred to the City Council for this purpose. I would like to reassure the committee that this situation will not arise. It is and always has been our intention to provide a new club and sporting facility for the benefit of the Baffins and wider Portsmouth community. We have also spoken with the City Council about the possibility of them buying 3 of the 4-bedroom houses so they could be offered as affordable housing. This is on the understanding that the 3 houses would be pepper potted along the row and they would be bought at a market rate. Finally, we would also like to reassure local residents that during the construction phase, the site would have a 24-hour site hotline so that local residents can contact the site management at any time to discuss any issues they may have. I hope that this demonstrates to the committee that we are a committed local community club who want to work with you and with local residents to provide a high-quality community facility that the city can be proud of. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure we will make the correct decision.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Chair. Further to the comments at the previous meeting, for which everybody except Councillor Pitt was present, it seems clear to me, as it seems clear to increasing numbers of local people that we've spoken to since the meeting, that this will almost certainly go through today. They've treated us essentially as a fait accompli, and several of them have treated it as fait accompli for months. So I just want to make some comments, if I may, Chair, in line with your comments around the issues relating to the deferral. And I wanted to start with what actually seemed like the harder of the two, which is the affordable housing. After the last meeting, I went away and talked through with the Council's team about the possibility of providing the 3 houses that Mr. Seedon has mentioned. I'm pleased that the club is interested in that proposal. And I think that may be an interesting way forwards in future. It shows the Council is committed, as was the comments of Councillor Smythe and other people, towards providing homes Portsmouth people can afford. With regards to parking, which I thought was the easier of the two, has turned out, and I know the club has spoken to a gentleman called Andrew Robb, who for Councillor Pitt's benefit did an oral deputation at the meeting last time, and has behind the petition that you see in the additional representations, and talking to him. The issues are really affect the houses from 21 to 47, as he has outlined in his in the petition, which I know he is behind, in particular around the belief of overnight parking. Now, the difficulty for talking to other residents, they are less concerned about the overnight parking, particularly in the lower numbers. And I think the issues are partly, as Mr. Seedon has outlined, but also talking to several of them, it's also around the actual concept of the car park itself. And I think that some of the issues raised in the objections, and which Mr. Seedon has raised, will also occur around Friday and Saturday nights, when people will be leaving events late. And I think part of the problem here is actually around, and this may where it could get tricky, around the very late start time Mondays to Thursdays. I understand from reading the application that the lights are going to go out by 11:30, which leaves people 30 minutes to get in the car park. I said, and this is for Councillor Pitt's benefit previously, that in fact what we should do is we should work this through as part of the legal agreement, which will give us 3 months to thrash out things, but I think there should be a secure form of parking if we go ahead. And that could be through key fobs, it could be through security gates, it could be through parking permits, because if we don't, then the issues outlined in the petition are correct. And that may well happen. And that's why I would urge the committee to look and work with the club as part of a legal agreement to see whether an earlier start time is possible. 8 o'clock has been regularly mentioned to me by people as a start time Mondays to Thursdays. I don't believe the club will go if that start time occurred, but that will give maximum reassurance to people. Otherwise, we do have the worst of all worlds, and I don't think anybody wants that. I mention the car park in particular because it is part of the protected open space that's going to be lost, and that's why it has a disproportionate effect on there. My final comment is around the future. As I said, I believe this committee is going to accept and agree this application today based on what occurred previously, and so it's about trying to bring the community back together again. There are many, many people who live locally who are not club shareholders, but who feel disappointed about the lack of engagement between the club and them, especially over the last year. They don't want the club to close, they want the club to succeed, but they're frustrated that they haven't been part of those discussions. And I think going forwards, what certainly I'm happy to do working with the club is to work on a way that we can try and bring everybody in the North Baffins Committee back together again. I would suggest some early additions to this. In addition to the 24-hour hotline, I would suggest, as I've suggested to committee colleagues previously when we looked at Kingston Prison, a liaison group to thrash out any particularly intractable problems that may occur, which would involve the club, the contractors, local councillors and local residents. That would be a constructive way forwards, because there may be some thorny issues that can't be dealt with by a telephone call. And then I think also a series of ways in which we could, the club can work with people in the immediate community and in the immediate area. We know about the neighbourhood SIL contribution that is on its way, and myself and my two local council colleagues will be talking to people about that very soon. But as I said, I think that this is a fait accompli. I think that colleagues will pass this today. I'm delighted about the affordable housing. I hope we can go for an earlier start time and the parking, because otherwise it is going to be the worst of all worlds. And I hope that all of us in the North Baffins community that I represent, and the club that many of them want to succeed and they want to be part of, can come together again and we can go forwards with confidence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sanders. We now come to members' questions, and I would repeat my request to members that you do not repeat things which you asked last time. Councillor Stubbs.
In the updates, and there's reference to the residents in what's it called, Salcombe Avenue, and it says in there that they would like the situation whereby in effect you can have the parking as a planning condition, and the planning condition can somehow later automatically be removed if it's not working out. Now, my understanding is that that's simply something you can't do. The planning conditions as agreed are the planning conditions, but would the one of the officers comment on that, just for clarity?
Obviously, this is sort of from the perspective of the residents, but it would equally be a problem for the club if there is security problems, antisocial behaviour, or complaints of noise, etc. The reason why it's done as a condition is that if treated like a trial, if you like, if there prove to be problems in the future, the applicant could apply to vary or remove the condition.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I knew that was the situation. I just wanted to just put it on the record, because the position of the residents is somehow the council should remove the condition, whereas in actual fact it would have to be the landowner applying for an update on the planning consent.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously I wasn't on the committee the first time round, but I've read the report in detail and watched back the live stream of that meeting. I've also subsequently asked to be updated by Alan and Claire just on a few questions to make sure I was fully up to speed and in the same place as everyone else. And I'm still utterly mystified as to why the economic viability impact is completely in camera. Why is it that we have passed a motion at full council around viability assessments, and I completely understand the argument around enabling development, but why are we not seeing those? Why are the public not being fully informed as to if it is a valid argument, and I believe it probably is, that that the enabling development is required for the club to go ahead and secure its future, then that should be done openly and transparently. We haven't even got a copy of the viability report in front of us as exempt papers today. the public have to have confidence that when this committee makes a decision, that we have weighed up all the issues properly. Now, the whole centre of this is surely around the enabling development and whether the sums mean that the housing element of this is needed to fund the club and that there is not sufficient funding to supply affordable housing. I want to know 100% definitely that that is the case. Currently I don't, and I'd like to know why.
So, members, we're quite happy to share the figures with you, but we can't do that in a public session. So if we want to now discuss the figures, Kieran, correct me if I'm wrong, we'd have to now go into a closed session and ask the members of the public to leave for us to have a discussion around the figures and then for the members to come back in.
Then a clarification, Chair, if you'll permit. Why?
You are right in terms of viability assessment and guidance on it has changed in recent changes to the MPPF and the planning practice guidance note, and there is a report that's due to come to PRED relating to that matter. However, the way these figures and the way the application was presented was at a time where the figures weren't going to be put in the public domain and there's confidentiality around those figures. So going forward, in terms of the way applications will be dealt with by the council, it will be that the figures will be presented as part of an application and will be known to be public documents. But the figures weren't, and the application wasn't presented in that way. So we can either go into a closed session or you can ask us questions around the viability for us to confirm how the relationship between the development, the affordable housing element, and then the enabling development relate to each other, and any issues around the developer and how the role he might be playing within the development in terms of profit and so forth. And without disclosing figures, we can answer those questions in front of the public now.
If I might add, there was some broad figures included by the applicant in a document that is available for public inspection, but obviously not the appraisal or the review done independently by Val Williams.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. And I think Councillor Pitts raised a good question, because actually as councillors we do get people challenging us over this, particularly on larger developments. Just to help, from experience I've got from previously, is that, for example, if the document was made public to everyone now, as it is, and Moneyfield's having to be negotiating with the developer to buy the development parcel of the land, should permission be granted, it could weaken their position if they've put on paper, you know, the Val Williams assessment of this house is going to cost $130,000 to build a 4-bedroom detached house. It could affect the overall value, would be my layman's take on things. And I think that's the reason why, as a council, it's difficult for us commercially to put the information that we're given as part of the viability assessment into public domain, because it could detriment the landowner going forward long term. But I see the point you're making.
Councillor Pitt.
I agree with Councillor Jones. However, I don't think that's different for any economic viability assessment. Understanding the figures and what's going on with it is a key part of this committee's responsibility. And on previous occasions, the head of planning has specifically asked the applicant if they would be prepared for even a redacted, semi-redacted version of a report to be published and brought in front of this committee. On several occasions that I can recall in the last 2.5 years that I've been on the committee, we have had applicants voluntarily offer up their viability assessments for public scrutiny. So it does happen, and there is precedent for it. When we had the application for the Kingston prison site, that was what started this whole process, because members were given 10 minutes in a meeting to look at a 28-page report and come to a conclusion. That triggered a process of lobbying which was cross-party at full council around greater transparency in these matters. So I'm going to directly ask the head of planning, was the applicant asked to make the figures public?
And I'm just going to defer to Alan as the case officer.
What was agreed? I mean, the issue with this is it's quite an unusual set of circumstances. I mean, no one is in any doubt that building 26 houses will bring some profits, but ultimately, wherever you put as an abnormal cost or you know, a deficit, £3 million for a replacement club facility and pitch, on a scheme of 26 dwellings is not going to show a profit. So what was agreed with the club is that some figures were included in a publicly available document, and obviously that was put in public access.
Can I just confirm to the meeting? I've just asked the applicants if they're happy now for us to share figures with you now. They've confirmed that they are happy. So it may be easier, Alan, for you to just read the figures through so that we can share them with you now, and then you can be aware of the figures. Obviously, Alan has explained it's a slightly unusual situation because we've got this enabling element to it. But if you're happy for us to proceed like that.
Just a quick contrary view on that, which is that I have to agree with Alan. I mean, there's no way that this is going to add up in such a way that there's going to be a profit after paying for a £3 million clubhouse. And you can argue the figures could be 10,000 out here, 50,000 out there. It won't make any difference to the viability. It's clearly going. It's just obvious that this is not going to be a scheme under which can pay for affordable housing. I just think it's very clear cut.
Whilst that may be so, I think that all the information which can be given should be available to members. Sorry.
Sorry, if I may just confirm through, if I can just confirm through Mr. Pickup, you are happy for that to become public knowledge to the extent that everybody in this room and beyond would be able to read the Vale Williams document?
Yes, we're happy for it to be made public.
Thank you.
I've said so. Thank you.
Mr. Banting? Oh, sorry, Councillor Pitt.
If it's helpful, I have 3 specific questions which may give everyone an overview of the situation rather than us spending an hour drilling down into the figures. So if members happy for me, okay.
Number 4.
Okay, then it becomes a free-for-all, that's fine. But just trying to speed things along a bit. Could you tell us, Alan, what the total... how can we put this? What the total residual income after the build costs are for the housing elements of the development? Probably is. I just want it to be in the public domain.
Might be that Mr. Pickup could help with some of that as well.
Yes. According to Vale Williams, of course, because that was the report that the Council commissioned.
Mr. Pickup, are you?
I was just going to refer members to the extract Alan showed on the overhead, which showed the summary of the costs of the development. That's obviously not the Vale. Sorry, that's not the assessment that was carried out by the council's consultants, but that would show you a clear summary of where the money's coming from, where it's going, and the rest of it. So if you want to put that on the overhead, sorry, that would show you those figures.
If I can explain to the applicant where I'm coming from here. We've had a number of these that have subsequently led to an awful lot of discussion and argument. I'm trying to avoid that happening. The Val Williams report that was commissioned by the council was to provide independent scrutiny to the assessment that you'd done, and as long as those figures show what we all expect it to show, and then it's out there, I think in terms of what Councillor Sanders referred to about community cohesion on a difficult project, we are better off understanding once and for all that any future whispers going around the community are unfounded because the figures have demonstrated it in a public forum.
Sorry. Just to respond, if I may, we have said we'd be happy for it to be made public previously. So, but that I provided that summary statement because it is a very complicated sort of financial document, and I don't understand, to be honest, 100% of it all. Anyway, I'm not a financial consultant, but that sort of gives you the overview of the finances involved.
Yeah. Councillor Jones, can Mrs Upton-Brown please inform us of what the Vale-Williams report is stating?
Okay, the difficulty that Alan's having is that the Vale-Williams report doesn't actually total the figures. So for the Vale-Williams report, they've done the residual build, but they've done it as per square metre. So on, yeah, which is why Alan's been looking a bit, oh my goodness, where's my calculator? So that for plot 1 to 14, they've done a residual build cost at £1,593 per square metre. So that's for the flatted part, and then there's a slightly cheaper, which you'd expect, build cost for the individual dwellings at £1,294 per square metre. For the commercial build, we have the it's an average of 3 quotes for the commercial build, but it comes in at 2.866667 million. We've got a contingency in the build at 5%, which is reasonable contingency. They've calculated the SIL spend, which is a SIL figure we've confirmed. There is a profit element in this, and again, I'll qualify that, there is a developer involved in this scheme, so we would expect to see a developer's profit of 17.5%. The recent guidance that's come out from central government in terms of viability assessments is that we'd be looking for a range of profit on a low-risk scheme of between 18 and 20%, so it's slightly below that figure. And then there's the sort of normal marketing and sales fees that we'd expect to see at 185,735. And then in terms of the timings, they've done a 6-month lead-in time, an 18 months construction time, and then an 8-month sales period. So sort of the whole span of that then is taking us through to 2 years, 8 months. And that's a summary of the figures from Vale-Williams that we've based our planning judgments on.
Councillor Pitt.
Okay, that's very helpful, Claire, thank you. And forgive me for not crunching the square meterage at this end, but I think I can probably get to a point where it would be helpful. So in order for the general public to understand exactly what you've just said, in terms of the scheme costs, there is an assumption in there of 17.5% profit, which is indeed under the 18 to 20% that the government states. Okay, in the report that we have in front of us, I have, forgive me because it's a long report, but I will find it. On page 31, about halfway down, there is a paragraph that states the construction of the community facilities pitch at just under 3 million requires the profit from the open market sales, 26 houses, but still leaves a funding gap of around £1 million. This funding gap is currently proposed to be met by a private individual or the combination of a private individual and as yet unsecured grant finance. Now, viability assessments, as we've just heard, enable the developer to make a 17.5% profit. Does the £1 million gap assume the profit? So in other words, if the 17.5% profit was not in there, is there a £1 million gap? I want to know whether this is because the rules say you can make 17.5%, which is fine, and under a normal development that's not enabling, that would be a bigger consideration. But on this one, when we're just trying to get down to crunch the figures, I want to know, is somebody actually going to have to stump up £1 million, or does the project actually stack up without that £1 million? Because, and only because, there is a statement in the report that says an additional £1 million needs to be located, and I want to know whether that is the case, because in terms of an enabling development, we are looking at whether this does stack up on its own or whether there is actually, in real terms, money left over to fund everything.
In real terms, there is that gap. So the profits will be taken away by the developer, and there still remains a gap in the project in terms of funding. In planning terms, the reason why we're looking to put the controls we are through the 106 is because there's still a question in our minds about, is this going to really happen? Or are we being asked to consider an enabling scheme that still has an element of an uncertainty? And if we granted a planning permission, the applicant could walk away with a permission in his hand saying, well, you know, we've come forward with this great scheme, telling a story around enabling, but we've got a permission now, we're never going to build the clubhouse. And so the reason why we're saying to you this afternoon that this is structured in the way it is there is that funding gap, and we are dealing with a situation where we've got a developer that will have a permission to carry out a development, that will have a profit, and therefore we need to make ourselves completely confident that if we grant a planning permission, that we've done that legally, because we've tied the applicant down through the 106 so that he can't just develop out the houses and do nothing to provide that community enabling facility.
That's really helpful, Claire, and I think hopefully helpful to people sat watching and listening at home as well. So just final question on this, for absolute clarity, Val Williams have confirmed that once all the income is taken into consideration and the outgoing on developing the whole scheme is taken into consideration, they agree that an additional £1 million will be needed to bridge that finance gap.
That's the advice that they have given us.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Councillor Smythe.
This is a question relating to the finances. We've taken the advice of Sport England on this, and I imagine this is exactly the kind of scheme that Sport England would normally subsidise. What happens if the club applies for a Sport England grant to help with capital costs afterwards, and therefore, in effect, is able to make more out of this than we're at the moment happy with, given the fact that we're losing open space and sacrificing, and the fact that we're sacrificing affordable housing for this development.
There has been some discussions around sporting funds that have sat outside the application, but that we have been party to, myself and another officer, Kelly Nash, who's been working on the whole issue around sports provision within the city and how we might improve the offer that we have. So outside the application there has been that discussion that didn't proceed. I can't sit here today and say, well, 100% Sport England are never going to give them a grant because I'm not Sport England and I couldn't possibly give you that certainty. However, there remains a £1 million funding gap. So there is still a gap, and if Sport England chose through another route to try and help fund this, then that would fill that gap. But there is no suggestion that Sport England are in a position, and obviously are familiar with the application because they've been a consultee, that they were likely to step forward and provide the amount of funding required to enable this facility to come forward.
Thank you. I'm glad that has been considered. Thank you.
Councillor Pitt.
I think in the interest of openness and transparency, I should state that I was party to those discussions. I had no idea that Councillor Smythe would particularly reference it. But I do know that what Claire has just said and the conversation she's had with Kelly would reflect the statement that she's just made, and that at the moment Sport England are giving no indications to that effect. And I know that because I'm the Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure and Sport, and therefore these things come past me. I just didn't realise it was going to get mentioned today.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Two questions, but I'll start with the finance because it's a follow-on from what I've just heard there, which is really the question I was asking last time about the phasing and about making sure that these two parts didn't part ways because there was a money. Just so I'm clear on it, the first part of the question is to do with the escrow that you're effectively saying in terms of making sure the money is taken up. Say it came to pass that the two bits of this did part ways. The houses were, they weren't going to build the bits and pieces, or the houses were built or whatever on that one. How does this escrow work so that I and the public understand?
Right, how we're proposing to deal with the 106, and I will caveat that because it's still part of the negotiation if delegated authority is granted to move this forward. But the proposal is that we've tried to break down what's being proposed in terms of what the policy implications are and what the two different products are, because we've got a block of flats and we've got residential. The block of flats would be the first build, and we've looked at that as a block to work out what would be the affordable housing provision and what sort of money, if we were taking a commuted sum, might be involved. So we'd look to take the equivalent contribution of 4 units and hold that money for a period to make sure that everything else happens, so that we ensure that the whole of the scheme has been looked at rather than just part of the scheme. So that's the way we'd seek to control it. It may be that the details slightly change during the delegation period as we negotiate out the wording of that 106, but that's the principle that we're approaching it at the moment, rather than trying to get involved in a very complex discussion around profits across a whole development. We feel that that's a straightforward, simple, transparent planning rationale to enter into a 106 to secure what we're trying to secure in terms of making sure that if everything else fails, that we have not totally lost the ability to provide the 30% affordable housing.
Councillor Wood.
Chair. And the other bit was going all the way back with Councillor Sanders, talked about, and I go back to this parking, and I know we've covered this several times on this, and he talked about putting something legal around it. I'm just trying to understand what the word legal means in this, because as I understand it, a discussion's been had, and this is really an offer that they're making in terms of parking, but last time we said there was no conditions that you could place on it apart from a generic condition. I'm just trying to understand what the word legal means to turn it.
Right. It wouldn't have been something that could have been imposed by the local plan authority on the applicants. Obviously, they've offered it up, and it is now intended to be covered by a planning condition. I think it's number 13. Forgive me if I got that wrong. And so because it's been offered, it is part of the matters that can be secured by planning condition.
Councillor Stubbs.
Just to follow up on that, when Alan said that that condition couldn't be imposed, does that also mean it couldn't be enforced?
Right. It's the fact that how the car parking arrangements would take place going forward couldn't be something that was imposed on Moneyfields. Obviously, they've offered it up. There is sufficient nexus because this is the wider public benefit that you as decision makers have to weigh into the consideration. It is something that is considered reasonable, and if it wasn't provided, it could be a matter that's covered by a breach of planning condition.
Councillor Pitt.
While we're on the car park, Alan, could you flip to the slide that shows the site plan, please? Oh. When I read the committee report, which I did first before I watched back the first hearing on this, I got to the end of the report and I thought, well, providing there's some clarity around the figures and we understand that this truly is an enabling development, and I think we've got there, I can't see any reason why we could find material grounds to refuse the application. And then I looked at the site plan, and I was actually quite shocked that a road that doesn't currently exist is being built at the back of people's houses, and there's a car park at the bottom of their back gardens, and this appears to not be a really big deal. Because I'll tell you for nothing, if somebody was going to build a flipping car park at the end of my back garden, I'd be absolutely livid, and I'm sure pretty much everybody else in this room would be. So I just need to understand a bit more about what boundary treatments are going on the boundary between the back gardens of those houses on Salcombe Avenue and the car park. What's the gap? Is the height of whatever's proposed there something that's considered normally acceptable? I mean, we've had arguments in this planning committee about somebody wanting to build a shed that was 20 centimetres higher than PD. So I'd just like to understand a little bit about what the fence looks like. I actually disagree with my colleague, with Councillor Sanders. Well, we may be in the same political party, but on this case we're on opposite sides of the fence. I think the overnight use of a car park where the lights go off at 11:30, whether that's 8 o'clock at night that they're parking there or 11:30 at night, I think the residents on Salcombe Avenue are right. Having people climbing, potentially parking a car up and jumping into their back garden would really scare me. But I'd just be also interested to know what lighting is going to be in that car park, because if it's PIRs or it's some kind of flood lighting, has an assessment been done about the potential light impact, like pollution, on those houses in Salcombe Avenue? I mean, we've had things where small extensions are built on houses, and we've had charts put in front of us about the effect of that, in terms of the sun, etc. We've gone into a lot of detail for one house. We've got an awful lot of houses there, and I'd just like to really understand what the lighting looks like at night, what the boundary treatment fencing is like, and whether we are really understanding the potential impact on those people's back gardens.
Okay, if we start with the fencing, you'll see X to X dash. Along the full length of the eastern boundary is a 2-metre high acoustic fence. So that's inside, on the sort of club side of the ground there, not the gardens. The existing boundary treatments will be retained. This would be a new acoustic fence on the club side. And there was a discussion around the proposal and how ultimately placing the clubhouse in the middle of the site is going to change the dynamic of the use of that club, but that ultimately there was still a lawful use of money fields for D2 purposes, and so it will form part of the planning judgment. With regards to the lighting assessment, you'll find in the comments made by Environmental Health, yes, a lighting assessment has been done. They have identified maximum luminance levels and gone back to the applicants around making sure that it is reasonable and appropriate for the site, that otherwise would be quite dark at night. So it all forms part of weighing up the merits of this scheme, but obviously it has been discussed at the last meeting. Yeah, but so just for clarification, did every house in Salcombe Avenue receive a neighbour letter? Did they also receive a copy of the site plan showing them that that was going to be there? Right, the neighbour letter alerts neighbours, third parties, to the fact that a planning application has been submitted. It's self-service, available via public access, or somebody calls into the Civic and looks at the case file. But the details of the lighting assessment all form part of the public documents. Just to confirm, as I asked, did all of Salcombe Avenue receive a street letter? Yes. Okay.
Right, that concludes questions. Comments from members, please. Councillor Donna Jones, then Councillor Luke Stubbs.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I mean, having considered this twice now, you know, I think the loss of open space, as I said previously, is something that we really must be mindful of, particularly in a city that's so densely populated, where we have such a lack of public open space. However, as is quite rightly allowed within the National Planning Policy Framework around the loss of public open space, and there are 3 classifications as the justification, this quite neatly fits into C within the legislation, which is contained within the report, and that is to enhance the community benefit for the local area. Moneyfields is one of the oldest community football clubs in the city. I think it's right and proper that the 1,000, 1,500 odd members they have, and potentially anyone who lives in and around the city that wishes to become a member of this football club have the opportunity to do that. And the loss of community football clubs across the city would be a very sad thing for Portsmouth, seeing as we're such a dedicated and committed football city. In terms of the actual development we've got before us, it is a tight residential area around here in Baffins. The houses are quite close to the site, but in view of that, I think this has been done quite sensitively. The block of flats being nearer the train line will certainly act as a buffer to the houses that are alongside it. And I think that the architects and the planners here that have worked on this have actually done a sensitive job so that the houses that are in Moneyfields Avenue are looking onto residential property, as opposed to, actually, and no offence to Moneyfields, but their current site isn't particularly attractive to look at. Their clubhouse is not very nice. I've been in it a few times, and their car park is not very attractive either. So would you rather look at shiny new houses if you live in a house in Moneyfields Avenue or one of the roads off of it, or would you rather look at a slightly tired 1960s style car park? I'd probably rather look at a shiny new house, as long as it wasn't going to have a huge detrimental impact on parking. Now that brings me on to the parking issue, which is the fact that these properties are being built with their parking space. So again, I think that's been sensitively incorporated into the design, and we heard obviously previously there wasn't, for Councillor Pitt's benefit, I know he said he's watched the previous committee. Obviously we did have a discussion about the access of up the side into that car park and why the highways team supported that as opposed to other options, and of course I suppose it's to maximise the commercial development space within that site. I think the community statement, the enhanced community statement that's come back from through Mr Pickup from the applicants in terms of the overnight parking for residents, I think it's always been there, but it now just formalises it a little bit more. I'm pleased that they've listened and taken on board comments from people in Salcombe Avenue about it not being a public car park. Obviously, if it's a public car park, you can get joyriders, boy racers, and it's so much more difficult to move them on under civil law if you need to. But with it being a permit for local residents only, I think that gives the club more, and local residents, more surety around stopping any antisocial behaviour. The free pitches of the football on 2 Sunday evenings a month, again, they want to obviously make this development commercially viable for the club themselves long term and get as much money out of people using those pitches as they can, but offering up 2 Sunday evenings and the involvement of PITC, who we know to be a reputable local charity, I think is a very good thing indeed. The fact the council's negotiating on the affordable housing, fantastic. We know that we need more of that. If we can buy them at a rate that's conducive to the council in terms of 4-bedroom properties and the amount it would cost us to build them if we were doing them elsewhere, then again, if that works, fantastic. And I think the Section 106 agreements that seem to be in place, looking through the recommendations in the report, to protect the club, as Claire Upton-Brown has said, to protect the council's interests so that we don't end up having a development with the profits being hived off and then nothing ever being built that will enhance the community, I think is very good indeed. When I looked at the numbers, it looks like there is a £1,099,235 straight profit on the development, and if you take into consideration the 17.5% development cost that Councillor Pitt was referring to quite rightly, that is just under £1 million. It's 917 odd thousand. So you can see that that funding gap is, as they've stated to us, around £1 million if they're trying to reach 3 million, which also seems to me a sensible price to build 2 new pitches and also a clubhouse. So in view of the constraints, the tight site where this is, with a lot of built-up residential around it, adjacent to a train line, and trying to overcome that difficulty around the development of public open space, I think this is a very good proposal in front of us. I know it's been a long time in the coming, and I'm happy to propose the conditional permission as laid out in the officer's report.
Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, you'd think, from some of the debate that this committee is looking around for a reason to refuse this application, and I think that's very much the wrong way of going. I think that this is excellent. It's bringing in millions of pounds of investment in sporting facilities. It's securing an important community club, and it's not costing the taxpayer a penny. So this is very much the sort of thing I want to see. I accept the role of the enabling development within this scheme. On a couple of the points for the deferral, I mean, as I said at great length when we discussed this before, I think that the deferral really were, those items are effectively not legitimate planning grounds, and I still have that opinion that when we're talking about the parking, for example, and the overnight use of the car park, that is something which is entirely proper for the cabinet members, ward councillors and so forth to talk to the club. But I don't think that's something you can really tie into the planning decision, and I'm still of that view, and I think it was somewhat confirmed when the planning officer said that we wouldn't have been able to impose this planning condition. We can only have it, planning condition on the car park, because the applicant has offered it. Now, I am, somewhat doubtful about whether an overnight use of the car park under these restricted terms is actually a good thing anyway, because it just feels like something which is going to lead to problems for both the club and nearby residents and not make a lot of difference to the parking situation. So, I've got some doubts about the wisdom of condition 13, and of course, if the club then, because if this goes through in this form as a planning condition, if the club then decides not to do this, it's having problems, well, it would technically be in breach of planning law by changing its policy. So I do have some doubts about that, that I'm not actually going to propose removing the condition. I mean, since it's been through this negotiation process, but I'm not at all convinced by it. And on the affordable housing question, I think it's open and shut that this is not a scheme which is going to generate sufficient profits to pay for the clubhouse and for other things on top. I have to say, bearing in mind the financial plight of the housing revenue account, which is in a significant deficit, that just buying up more housing at market rate and then letting it out for less than that, in other words, council pouring in money as a subsidy, is not something that it can really afford to do. And so, I don't think that's the right way of going. And frankly, if you're going to buy up properties, you're much better off buying up former council properties in areas like Portsmouth, because you'll get them at a lower cost. But no, I think this is a very good application. I'm more than happy to second the proposal for granting permission.
Smythe, followed by Councillor Udy.
I would have likewise been happy to second the proposal. I just wanted to use this opportunity to make a comment for the minutes that I think one of the difficulties we've got into here, given that we're losing public open space, is that right from the start we should have been using our enabling facilities a bit more strongly to get a housing association interested in the land, for example, so that the whole site could have been affordable housing and there could have been assistance for the club in developing. And I just want to make sure that we do have a really good look at alternative ways of getting affordable housing. The Section 106 has never been a good way of doing it, and I would like to have it minuted that we are going to look at how best we can get affordable housing in these sort of circumstances, when really this is a piece of public open space in the future, and we indeed will include that in our local plan when we come to it. And I'm really pleased that we did postpone this, because I'm grateful to see these offers that have been made, which weren't made before, and I think that makes me persuaded that I want to support this application.
Councillor Udy, then Councillor Pitt.
I just want to say thank you. It was really nice for you to put those conditions in on community use, and well, it's been seconded. It's cool.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Stubbs refers to whether we were having an argument about refusal. For me, it wasn't about that. I'd like to drill, as Mr Upton Brown will testify, I'd like to drill down into every little bit in front of the public and when we're on live stream to make sure that people understand exactly what's happening and why, because although we as councillors have often we've had briefings, we're on committee all the time, we understand the rules and how things work. I don't think that's necessarily true of somebody who lives in a house and has happily lived there for 30 or 40 years and never had anything impact on them at all, and then suddenly somebody's going to do something to them that they weren't expecting. And I think they deserve to have those arguments aired fully and for that interrogation to take place so that everybody understands exactly what's going on. So that was the motivation for asking all those questions. I think the proposal that's in front of us, as Councillor Sanders alluded to in his deputation, is one that I think people have largely accepted will go through. I think it's the case that we do need to improve the facilities there. Like Councillor Jones, I've visited Moneyfields on a number of occasions, and the building is pretty much at the end of its usable life. For me, I have no issues with any of it at all. The question mark in my mind was the car park behind the houses at the end of Salcombe Avenue. It seems clear that to me, that the residents of those houses don't want it used as an overnight car park facility. So I think we need to, I agree with Councillor Stubbs on that, we need to monitor that very clearly and very carefully if that goes ahead, so that if there are any issues at all, that we look to review that. And I don't think anybody would want antisocial behaviour developing there, and I'm sure Councillor Sanders in his deputation would completely agree with that, that what we need to be doing is keeping a close eye on it, making sure if it's going to be used, it's going to work. So the car park was an issue for me. I have to be honest, I'd rather it was on the railway line side, because I think there would have been a less impact to people. But I can't see a material reason for refusal, given that the acoustic fence is going to be put in there. However, I do reiterate that I personally wouldn't like to have a car park at the end of my garden. But we have to go on material considerations, and for that reason I will support it.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, last time I said I didn't think there was any problem with the actual overall proposal. There was a point about that we were losing green space and not building enough of affordable houses, etc. And so what was the offer to the community, because it will impact the community. And I think it's good to see that a negotiation has happened. And the applicants have gone and talked to them. I hope they continue that, because I think one of the key things with feedback I've had is local residents would like to continue a dialogue with yourselves, and that's quite important because they are your neighbours, etc. That's an important thing. But I agree. I think they've moved things on. I think with the car park, yes, we'll have to monitor the car park, and I understand Councillor Sanders' view that it would be great if it was earlier, and I guess in a way that's a foot in the door really to continue that conversation. And I also take on board that it could also go the other way, which is it could be an issue, but you're giving permits, and I really would say I would also just monitor that, just to say how does it go along, and is there an opportunity to build a better viable interaction with your neighbours there, etc. So I will be supporting this, because I think overall it's a good scheme. It just needed to be a bit fairer for local residents. Thank you.
Right, members, you have 3 recommendations on front of you, which you will find on page 40. Recommendation 1 is for delegated authority for conditional commission, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Recommendation 2 is delegated authority to the Assistant Director of City Development to add and amend conditions where necessary. Recommendation 3 is that delegated authority be granted to her to refuse planning permission if the legal agreement has not been completed within 3 months of the date of resolution. These have been proposed and seconded. Can I see all members in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Before we move on to the next item, 2 comments which come out of that discussion. The first is that it is the duty of this committee to test all aspects of an application, and had Councillor Pitt or any other councillor gone beyond what is reasonable as a test, I would have stopped them. But I think it is important that we should be able to test every aspect of a planning application. Second comment is that I think it is now very clear that even if it is a confidential information, members should have sight before these meetings of any viability assessments which have been obtained by the City Council. And I would like that to be put into minuted, and it is at the Chairman's request. We now move on to 38 Vernon Avenue. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And can I have Mr. Peter Everley at the table, please? Yes, I think. Right, thank you, members. We come to 38 Vernon Avenue. There were two gentlemen there. I have a Mr. Peter Everley. Okay. Are you going to share it between you?
Sorry?
You both want to speak, do you?
No, he's just here for moral support.
Okay, I shall watch the moral support. Okay. We're not that frightening, I trust.
No, well, it's not something I do every day.
No, okay. Can I have the officer's report, please?
Good afternoon. The application relates to 38 Vernon Avenue, and planning permission is sought for the change of use from dwelling house Class C3 to purposes falling within Class C3 or Class C4 house in multiple occupation. The site relates to a two-storey mid-terrace dwelling located to a western side of Vernon Avenue. The surrounding area is characterised by densely populated terraces and is in close proximity to a range of shops and services on Fawcett Road and Fratton Road, and is also well serviced by a bus route. This slide just shows the principal elevation fronting Vernon Avenue. It's the stone-clad dwelling there. Also has a small front courtyard adjacent to the highway. Inside we've got combined living space of 3 to 6 people. The property benefits from a small rear garden. These pictures just show some of the bedrooms and bathroom facilities and more bedrooms. It is noticed the ground floor shower room and the first floor bathroom do measure slightly undersized. However, the combined floor area of the two would be approximately 5.75 metres squared and is therefore considered to be of a suitable size standard in planning terms. There are 2 HMOs located within the 50-metre radius of the site. Granting permission would increase the portion of HMOs to 5%, which is under the 10% threshold. All other matters are contained within the officer's report. Having regard to all the material considerations raised, representations and planning policy, it is considered the development is acceptable and conditional permission is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Everley, you have 6 minutes to tell us about your views on this application.
Good day, everybody. I think some of the issues that people were concerned about, well, firstly, one of them was the parking, because there's going to be 4 students, including one is my son. Only three of the students don't actually have a driving licence, and the one that does have a driving licence doesn't actually have a car. So, and actually, fact, and when I was working there for the 8 months, refurbishing the house completely, I obviously had my van there, and now I'm not there, so it's actually less parking problem now that my son is living there. I think the other issue was that the fact that I don't live in Portsmouth, and that I live in Reigate in Surrey, but because I'm in the building trade, I actually work quite a lot in Hampshire and Portsmouth, so I'm fairly local a lot of the time of the year anyway, and a lot of my subcontractors actually and friends actually live in Portsmouth, 2 of which live in Alveston, which is at the back of Vernon Avenue. So as for being in the proximity, I don't think that is probably an issue either. And as for and then I think another concern was the upkeep and the cleanliness. We employ a cleaner to come in 2 hours every fortnight to clean the house. They don't do the boys' rooms, but they clean. She cleans the kitchen and the bathrooms and their lounge area and the hall and stairs. So the house is being well maintained. I've spent all of my pension fund, which was £55,000, on doing this house up. It's not. People call it a student house, but it's not a student house. It's a family home that I've created for my son to live in while he's at uni. And once he's finished next year, it will be back to a family home again. And so, you know, I think a lot of the concerns and worries regarding local people, the neighbours, are probably based on a lot of the typical student houses that are in Portsmouth, which are in terrible condition and terrible state. And this house is far from that. You know, it's a big investment for me and my wife in the long term. And so it's had a lot of love and care doing it up, not for students to live in as such, but that's what it is at the moment. And so it's of a much better standard than a lot of properties. And so, you know, that is my kind of how I feel about the house. And before, a lady of 92 lived in it. It hadn't been touched for 50 odd years, and we've completely transformed it into a beautiful house. And that's basically what it is now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Everley. Members, questions? No questions?
Sorry.
Joe Cooper. Councillor Hooper.
Lovely job, really beautifully done. I'd just like to ask, and I appreciate the situation now, that your son is living there with other students, but students move on. So you've referred to it, will be back to a family home. Can you clarify, are you planning to move into it, or the students will no longer be there?
No.
After he's graduated?
The thing is, that the reason, I think if it was 4 students who I didn't know, I probably wouldn't let them live there. The fact that my son lives there and has helped me for the last 8 months working on it, and so he appreciates and so he's there looking after the house as much as anything. So to have 4 students who I don't know, and I do know the other 4 boys prior to them living in the house, and so yeah, and also the idea behind it all was for him to be there. But they're all doing the same degree. They're all doing economics. They're all working together, hopefully, to get themselves a degree at the end of next year or the middle of next year. And so we're not intending to re-let it to students next time, no.
Thanks for that clarification.
Comments? Councillor Smythe.
Mine was a very brief question. If
Oh, right.
a landlord is living in a house and then sharing it with friends, does it need planning application as an HMO?
It depends on the number of people living there. So if it's, and I'm sure one of either Gary or Jane will correct me on this, but I'm sure it's if a landlord is living there and he has more than 2 people, it becomes an HMO, and it's a different definition under the Housing Act from the planning position.
So 2 people, if there were only 2 additional people living there, would it not need a planning application? Is that the case?
So if it's a landlord plus 2, it requires permission.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Right, comments, members? Councillor Stubbs.
I mean, we often get HMO applications, and my position on this one is the same as it is for the bulk of those that we get, really, which is, you know, do I necessarily want to create another HMO? No, not really. But in terms of the policy position, it's clearly in line with policy, so I move the report.
Councillor Wood is seconding that. Any other people wishing to speak? Councillor Pitt.
Yeah, again, just for the sake of transparency, Chair, the city has a policy of no more than 10% of any properties within a 50-metre radius of the front door of the applicant property are able to be HMOs, and that, as we've had confirmed by the officers, on this occasion it's 5%, and therefore the only material issue I can see is that we've accepted that adding the 2 washroom sizes together is adequate to offset the fact that they're both a little bit smaller than otherwise, and otherwise this report probably wouldn't even be at the committee. So on that basis, I'm happy to also support officers' recommendation.
Right. Councillor Wood, do you wish to?
Yes, obviously, thank you, Councillor Pitt and Councillor Stubbs, for clarifying, first of all, the conditions that we'd normally grant this. And I think at the end of the day, just as a principle anyway, when we're looking at these HMOs, I think that the applicant has come forward and basically said it's going to be kept in good upkeep, and it seems to have convinced me that's the case, etc. Is an important aspect also, that part of the worry about HMOs is the fact that potentially in the city we have landlords who don't look after them, etc. And I think that's worth stating. That's partly why we introduced the 10% rule, which is to allow for the other residents to have the mixed economy and the ability to keep their a road in good condition.
Right, can I then move to the vote? Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. You have your planning permission. We move now to 32A Exmouth Road, a major development, and I would invite Mr. Foster, Mrs. Shepherd, Mr. Ian Knight and Mr. James Oliver to come to the table. I would also, for the record, like to state that although Councillor Smythe and myself live in the vicinity of 32A Exmouth Road, neither of us live sufficiently close that we need to declare any personal involvement. Can I have the officer's report, please? Right. Thank you for your attendance, Councillor Jones. Thank you. May we have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Just before I begin, I'll just draw your attention to the supplementary matter sheet. This details additional representations and the submission of a petition containing the names of 57 named individuals living within the city. In addition to that, there's also further comments from the City Council's drainage team and details of a further condition relating to foundation design. So the application relates to a broadly rectangular site located to the western side of Exmouth Road, just in here, to the south of the King's Theatre, Albert Road, and immediately south to the southern elevation of King's Mews. The site is currently used for a series of workshops, lock-up garages and a builder's store. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing buildings and the construction of a terrace of 8 dwelling houses. There have been similar proposals in the last year, 2 of which have been refused on design, parking and SPA mitigation grounds. This slide is just some some photographs showing the flank elevation of King's Mews, access to the builder's store and a series of lock-up garages. In terms of the principle of redevelopment, the site is allocated as a new housing allocation within the Portsmouth City Local Plan 2001 to 2011. Policy SJ8 is actually a saved policy, and therefore it has been expected to come forward as a housing development site for a number of years. In light of this policy, it's considered that the development is acceptable in principle, although you will note that the policy does actually allocate it for at least 10 dwellings, but this policy does not state the size of the dwellings, and in this case we have large family dwelling houses with 4 bedrooms, and the policy was adopted in advance of the residential size standards and the residential parking standards. The 2 previous refusals of the site did not cite principle as a ground for refusal. The drawing just shows also SJ9, which was an adopted policy at the same time as SJ8. Of course, this policy and this site has been developed out to form St Vincent's Mews. The local planning authority is also aware that the site is located within an indicative flood zone and also to the northern extent of the Great Morass, which is an area of drained marshland. We are aware that there is groundwater within the vicinity of the application site, and the City Council's drainage team indicates that this can be overcome through appropriate foundation design, and this would not be a constraint that would prevent the development of the application site. Planning conditions are proposed relating to drainage, foundation design, and the completion of the development in accordance with the submitted flood risk assessment. In terms of design, the terrace would be stepped and set back from the Exmouth Road frontage. A car park located to the rear of the site would include 8 spaces and also 3 multifunctional spaces which can provide additional parking for units 6, 7 and 8. In addition, following the removal of the existing drop curb which runs the full width of the site and the reinstatement of the pavement along this stretch of Exmouth Road, it would create 5 on-road parking spaces, although these would not be allocated to the development and would be available to for anybody to use. This slide is just showing the ground floor layout, typical open plan living. 2 bedrooms at first floor and 2 bedrooms and bathrooms at second floor, which is contained within the roof space. So in total the proposal is for 7 4-bedroom dwelling houses and 1 2-bedroom dwelling house. So following the 2 previous reasons for refusal at the site, the applicant has taken a different design approach and has gone for a more contemporary design solution with a simple palette of materials and some high quality details, including the large recessed windows on the front elevation, the parapet design, simplifying rainwater goods and the junction with the roof, the standing seam roof itself, and these large projecting dormer features. Side elevations, this would be abutting King's Mews. The applicant up front, to try and demonstrate the quality of the design and the appearance, has submitted the materials in advance of a decision being issued. This is showing powder-coated aluminium window frames and rainwater goods, powder-coated dormer surrounds and projection, and red brick, which is similar to that to the side elevation of the King's Theatre. The next few slides are just a series of visuals. I would point out that due to the computer package, they've not been able to render it in the materials that is a close match. So I've just shown the sample palette, so it's going to be similar to this, which is just some subtle variation in red tones. So a view from the east onto Exmouth Road, slightly from the north, aerial from the south, from the rear, and this one is from above, just showing that the scale of the dwelling houses is not dissimilar to the depth of the dwellings located to the northern extent of King's Mews. Sorry. So in design terms, it's considered that it is of a high quality and they would make a positive contribution to the street scene. A number of representations have suggested that the design is not in keeping with the surrounding area. This slide is just to indicate some of the developments within the same stretch of St Vincent's Road and Exmouth Road, including King's Mews, Garden View Apartments, the smaller terrace houses opposite, St George's Court, and the King's Theatre itself. And because of that variation within the street scene, it's considered that the design is of a sufficient quality to stand alone and would not appear intrusive within the street scene. In terms of parking, the site makes provision for 8 parking spaces to the rear, 3 within the multifunction spaces. Similar to that is provided at Wellington Street, which was developed out by the City Council. Whilst this would fall short of the 16 spaces required within the parking standards SPD and the concerns of the local highways authority are noted, the parking shortfall needs to be balanced against the positive aspects of this scheme, which includes the sustainable location within a short walk of a wide range of shops, services and recreational activities within Albert Road, within Palmerston Road and across the seafront, the provision of family dwellings contributing towards the city's housing needs, the quality of a design and the removal of the existing garages and workshops, and the creation of 5 further on-road parking spaces that would be available for any overflow from this particular development or for others within the area to use. So on balance, it's considered that these benefits outweigh the shortfall in parking provision, and for the reasons set out within the committee reports in front of you, the application comes with a recommendation with delegated authority to the Assistant Director of Regeneration to grant, subject to first securing mitigation in respect of the special protection areas. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Foster, Mrs. Shepherd, you have 6 minutes each, as do Mr. Knight and Mr. James Oliver. Mr. Foster, would you care to go first?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to air our concerns of the people affected by the proposal of the developers. Our objections are as follows: the loss of light and overshadowing due to the height, an invasion of privacy from the higher windows into our bedrooms, and forgive me, the grotesque design will blight the landscape. We don't think it enhances it. And it will devalue the surrounding properties. And also, we think the materials are a cheap design, and that they will deteriorate over a period of time. The parking, most families have more than one car. 14 bays is woefully inadequate, as 5 are on the public highway and are already used by residents and the publics. I have photos of cars parked there if they need to be seen.
If you present them to the committee, they become the property of the committee, but they will illustrate the point which you are thinking to make.
Also, these apartments will be enormous. The possibility of them being divided into flats at a later date triples the number of vehicles allocated to the parking bays. All these extra cars will be vying for parking spaces in Exmouth Road and the surrounding roads, plus adding to the King's Theatre's parking problems, and not ignoring the fact the loss of 20 garages, which are not derelict and are in use, as some of the names are on the petition. Parking cars is already a contentious issue in Exmouth Road. Geographically, the disturbance of the underground streams are a great concern, as it may alter the direction and the flow and height of water levels, in rising to a risk of flooding and damage to the surrounding properties. Will the developers and the council cover any cost incurred if this happens at a later date? Environmentally, this site was a petrol station, unknown if the fuel tanks are still in situ underground. Possibility of a biohazard risk to the streams. The concerns of many is this will have a detrimental and negative impact on a daily basis. Lastly, we are not against something being built in the future, but if it is sympathetic and in keeping with our two-storey houses. Thank you for listening to our fears and anxieties.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Mrs. Shepherd.
I'd just like to comment that it's a right of law and the privacy in our houses and the car parking issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. We'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Christie for his help along the way. As you've heard, this has gone through 2 previous applications and a pre-app to get to this point, so it's a decision that's come about through an extensive amount of cooperation, so thank you. To address the concerns from the public, with regards to highways, no transport assessment was required because the trip increase rate was not seen to be an issue, but also it wouldn't increase by more than 5%. But also the requirement for 15.5 spaces on site. We've provided 11 to the rear, and there's a further 5 spaces being proposed on the highway, and that's through the removal of the drop curb, which runs the full length of the site at the moment, and reinstating this. This then exceeds the actual requirements. The local housing authority supports the reinstatement of the full height curb, and that satisfies the access. And the parking standards are formed from the 2011 census figures on the average number of cars for the different size units. And as figure 4 of the parking standards in the SPD state, so we've used that as the primary source, and the parking levels on site then are for 7 4-bed and 1 3-bed dwelling, and that equates to a provision of 12.42 parking spaces. So just over 80% of the requirement is met on site, with the additional standards coming from the street. The LHA have suggested that reduction in parking levels wouldn't be unreasonable, however, because of the positioning of the property in relation to public transport. The Council sets out the expected parking standards rather than stipulating minimum and maximum standards, and as the Council wants to support the application that sets out quality development in adequate locations. So what came about from that was, following conversation with the highways officers, the plans were revised to make more provision for cycle standards. So we've now exceeded the parking standards for cycles. There's now 4 vertical parking spaces per dwelling in canopied rear yards in the amenity spaces. There's also provision of wall anchors in the front yards, providing 2 short-stay parking spaces for visitors. So that they identified a need for 30 spaces, and there's a provision of 48 spaces in this scheme, and that's been outlined in the design statement. and the on-street capacity, as I say, is increased following the removal and the extra 5 spaces. Environmental Health were also consulted about the generation of movements, and they concluded that there's going to be there's unlikely to have any substantial impact on the traffic in the area. And so, to that end, we welcome the conditions set by the authority. Other issues that have come about from the public, it's with regards to terms of height, design and siting. As Mr Christie's pointed out, that's something that we've come about through this revision of providing an enhanced set of materials, and we've scheduled that in our design proposal. With regards to loss of light and outlook, the scheme at the moment has 17 metres of separation between the houses on the adjacent Exmouth Road. The site behind is actually 4 stories high, which provides more of a shadow to the site than the proposal does. There's also existing outlook at the moment onto poor quality garages. This would be an enhanced outlook. And with a setting back of 4 to 5 metres from the footpath, it actually puts more separation in than is presently there. With regard to flood risk, the proposal was accepted by the Environment Agency, the proposal which was something which we conditioned to make sure that actually is carried out through the proposal. With regard to contamination, there's going to be a desk examination to look at any mitigation that's necessary. With regard to noise and disturbance, was something that was brought up. The scheme should be should see a substantial reduction by removal of the lock-up garages. And then with regard to the Great Morass and the drainage issues, the site is actually elevated by about 1 to 2 metres above the northern cusp of the Great Morass. So as such, any mitigation methods that are necessary to remove any damage, any potential issues on the groundwater table are taken out by its location, but also we're proposing a piled ring beam foundation system which takes you down to a suitable load-bearing stratum, which is about 20 metres below where it stops being the clay and becomes the denser sand. And with that raft, that means there's no adverse effect on the groundwater table, and that's something, again, that with the addition of the flood risk assessment provision of anti-backflow devices and the like, we should take away any risk of any knock-on issues to the surrounding area. And we'll be providing full details of that to the drainage team as has been requested. And then lastly, with regard to the SPA mitigation, we welcome the opportunity to make the SPA payment as a condition on this application. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Also, thank you, Mr Christie, for working closely with us over an extended period of time in order to provide this outstanding development of desirable, much-needed family houses. We went through the pre-planning process before submitting this application and followed all the advice the case officer has given us. This has resulted in a high-quality, modern design with much attention to detail. The proposed dwellings would be constructed in a dark red brick similar to those used at the King's Theatre and would incorporate large window openings and projecting dormer features. The inclusion of a parapet wall will create a neater junction between external walls and the roof. Recessed window openings will provide greater articulation, and the use of simple, high-quality materials will reinforce the modern design approach. There have been objections from the public in relation to the application. Most of these relate to the design type and the parking, and also we've had concerns from King's Mews regarding building techniques so close to their property. With regards to the design type, I quote the office's report. In design terms, it is considered that the resultant terrace would provide an unusual and interesting group of dwellings that exhibit a number of interesting and high-quality features that are necessary to make simple modern architecture successful. Exmouth Road has a real mix of properties. We have the King's Theatre at the top of the road, King's Mews directly north of this development, flat-fronted Victorian terraces opposite, George Court on the corner, and also followed up by a warehouse. As the area does not comprise one particular design style of property, we believe that this development would fit in perfectly and contribute to the character of the area. So the occupiers of King's Mews are concerned that this development may make maintenance of the south elevation difficult or impossible with a gap between the two properties. We have taken advice from our party wall surveyors, and we can build next to the King's Mews and completely close the gap between the two properties, subject to party and structural wall agreements being put in place. It is our intention to waterproof the buildings completely without any gaps being visible from the street. It may be necessary for King's Mews to require access in the future, and this is probably going to be achieved by an upper neighbour scaffolding. When the party and structural wall agreements are put in place, this will no doubt form part of it. The proposed development makes provision for 11 on-site parking spaces and bike storage. The current site utilises a dropped curb along its frontage to the road. This scheme will remove this and provide an additional 5 spaces on on-road parking. Although this is not on site, should this development be passed, it will provide 16 more spaces than which are currently available, therefore meeting parking criteria. I noted development on St Vincent Road was granted planning in September this year for 3 three-bed houses without providing any parking at all. The scheme proposed for this modern, high-quality development is exactly how modern architecture should look. As you can see from the visuals created, this building slots in perfectly within the road, maintaining the mix of old and new properties. The road needs to be improved from having noisy, unsightly, mixed commercial operations and lock-ups, and we want to contribute and improve the residential feel of the area. Portsmouth is desperate for 4-bed family homes. Over the past 13 years, only 13% of all new builds in Portsmouth have been houses. This needs to change. This proposal has been recommended for approval by the case officer, and I hope you allow this development of much-needed family housing to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members' questions. Councillor Rob Wood.
Can I just ask officers about, first of all, some of the concerns about loss of light, to understand where that's coming from, because obviously I can see these buildings here and I'm trying to understand where there may be an impact on loss of life. Can I start with that?
Of course, I did put the slide up while we were listening to the deputations. Bear me 2 seconds. There you go. So in terms of distances, the application site is located to the west of the smaller terraces on Exmouth Road. So as the sun moves around, there will be some shadowing later in the day, but that's as the sun sort of drops down behind the existing properties on Victoria Road South. And in terms of the amount of light changing throughout the day, I don't believe there is a significant impact, particularly given this 16 metres degree of separation. In terms of the opposite direction, yes, again, early in the morning when the light is not at its full strength, there will be some limited overshadowing, and the buildings will be noticeable from the rear of the properties on Victoria Road South. However, again, with a separation distance of nearly 35 metres, and in some cases 35, and that's from just the rear projections and not from the main dwellings themselves, that I believe there is sufficient and an adequate degree of separation to prevent any loss of light or overshadowing.
What other questions? Chair, if you
Yes,
don't mind.
Councillor Wood.
Okay. The other question refers to the past history of this site, the morass, stroke stream, stroke the petrol station. Obviously, not being an expert, how can I be sure that those things are being mitigated?
Okay, in terms of land contamination, yes, there is a former commercial and industrial use and history on that site, and if you have a look at the representations, the contaminated land team have been consulted as part of this application, as they are with many applications in the city because of the former industrial uses. So as part of one of the pre-commencement conditions, there will be a requirement for a ground investigation, and that will include any remediation of the site that is dictated by what is found. So that may be the removal of tanks if they are found and located. It may be the case that they need to remove some of the soil and replace it. There's a number of techniques to make this site suitable, and given that it's for family dwelling houses, that may be of a higher degree than perhaps you might expect if it was a block of flats that had hard surfacing across its entire site. In terms of its location on the Great Morass, yes, we're aware that it is a drained marshland, there are water issues, there's a high water table. We've discussed this in detail with our drainage team. They acknowledge that it is located on the morass, and poorly conceived design techniques could have an impact on the flow of water through the site, and that's why a further condition is required that will provide us with details of the foundation design, which will be informed by boreholes and monitoring of the water table in advance of coming up with the appropriate design solution for those foundations. But the key is that the whole of the surrounding area is developed, the presence of groundwater isn't unusual, and there are building techniques and design solutions available to allow this to occur.
And Chair, my final question, if it warrants, is the question around future use of these in terms of density, etc. And I guess the question was alluding to HMOs on that one. Do we do any look at what the density of current HMOs in that area are, or is it a area of low HMO density currently?
The proposal we have in front of us is for 8 Class C3 dwelling houses. They are not for Class C4 houses of multiple occupation. They've been considered on their merits as Class C3 dwelling houses. If proposals came forward in the future, when the development was built out, it would be subject to a further planning application. At that point, we would consider the merits of HMOs in this location.
Right, two questions from the Chair, unusually. The first one concerns the points which have made about parking, that there are 5 additional parking places on the road. Can this be considered as part of this planning application, since it is a provision which already exists, as we have seen from your own pictures on the public highway? How do we take that into consideration?
The simple answer is no, they cannot be considered as an allocation for this particular development. So we are looking at it, there are 11 off-road parking spaces against the 16 that are required by the parking standards SPD. There is the ability to remove the drop curb, and the photographs do show that people are parked on that drop curb at the moment. My colleagues and myself would agree that they are parking unlawfully. They should be allowing access for those garages. The reinstatement of the pavement and the removal of the drop curb would formalise and allow people to park whenever they wanted in front of those dwelling houses.
Right. So it's only 11. My second question, you spoke about groundwater being higher through the whole of the area. This particular site, of course, is one which was not developed in the Victorian era, largely because of an underground stream, which rose, 2 underground streams, one of which goes at the Victorian Albert pub, and the other one would be under the King's Theatre, what is now the King's Theatre. Is that going to be taken into consideration, that flow?
Again, yes, the answer is yes. In the supplementary matters sheet in front of you, there is a detailed condition that requires foundation design, which is influenced by a borehole at the application site, and monitoring of water levels both during dry and wet periods. So that should take account of the water flow within the area. Our own drainage team have boreholes across the morass, including at Wimbledon Park Sports Ground, and they can monitor the water levels and correlate that to the weather conditions and have a look at what the patterns are at this particular application site and other known sites within the surrounding area. And from that, we should be able to formulate a design solution for the foundations that does not affect the groundwater flows.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
This is probably quite a naive question, but as I'm quite new, I'm going to ask it. Would planning conditions be imposed whilst the current structures are dismantled to minimise disruption? Is that something you can...
In simple terms, yes, we can. Generally, we can ask for construction management plans as part of the development. As generally on smaller development, that's not always the case. I'm just checking through. There is, and I'll just refer you to condition. Yes, condition 5 requires the submission of a construction management plan. So that will include details of where deliveries will take place to, where site offices will be located. It may be measures to suppress dust, odours, smells, wheel washing if necessary, to make sure that there's limited disruption to residents. But there's also provisions beyond the planning system for the environmental health regime to prevent significant impacts on neighbours during the construction stage.
Councillor Smythe. Oh, right, okay. Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. On the, I note in the report, Gary, that the applicant will be restoring the height of the pavement to a more normal level, removing the drop curb, which is what creates the 5 spaces. Forgive me if I'm not seeing it, because it may be in there, the splay that's then necessary for the parking at the rear of the properties, does that stipulate that that is a drop curb on either side to allow unrestricted disabled access along the pavement?
There is a condition relating to the design of the access, I believe. Sorry, I'm just going to refer back to the conditions. Conditions too.
Other questions, members? You found the...
Sorry, I'm just looking through. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's my understanding that the approved drawings are effectively the drawings that the local planning authority, sorry, the local highways have considered and considered to be appropriate. Now, they're not suggesting that they need a bow-mouth junction in this location. It will effectively just be a dropped curb, so it would be sloped down either side. So in terms of pedestrian access, that shouldn't be impeded for those with mobility issues or scooters, pushchairs, whatever that may be. But in terms of the reinstatement of the pavement along that stretch, that would be subject to a licence with the local highways authority anyway, and the detailed design of the reinstatement and the cost of which would be met by the applicant.
Thank you very much.
Comments. Councillor Smythe.
It's always encouraging to see your own garden underwater, isn't it, on maps, and I can see mine there. Although, to be fair, we've got a small undercroft under our house. It's not a cellar exactly, but it's never been wet even when the water's been lapping up Victoria Road South. I've got every sympathy with Mr Foster and Mrs Shepherd. It's really difficult having developments like this happening near you. We had the same experience, and I want to reassure you a little bit, when George Court was built right behind our house. A lot of changes. With the distances we've got here, I wouldn't say it takes away light. It makes the sun go down or come up a little bit later, that's all. But I don't think that these distances are anything to worry out very, very much. The thing is about this area is that these bits of land have been allocated for housing for a very long time. And I'm really sitting here now, whilst fully understanding how people feel about developments going up in their road, do think we have a crying need for family housing, and these are decent, good family housing. I think there is a slight upside to this one as well. I remember my children, when they were being brought up just around the corner, some distance from the site, they didn't like walking down that street with those garages at night. They didn't like the fact that there could be people lurking down there. And I think, having some decent dwellings will make the street feel better, as you indeed pointed out. I'm also the design of these things is very much a matter of personal taste, and I have spoken to a number of neighbours about the design, and there are a number who don't like it, and there are a number who have had a look on the website and quite like it. We'll see. Keep the materials good and keep it good. I think. I personally think that the design is quite exciting, because so often we get developments that are just a copy of something that's sort of meant to be older, and I think personally they're not so good. So I'm going to would like to recommend this for approval, whilst fully sympathising with what you said. And I actually particularly think the point you made about the loss of garages, if we calculated planning things in terms of the loss and gain of parking, because parking is such a big thing around here, then we would end up minus overall. You're quite right to observe that, I think, but that's not how we calculate it. So I would like to move this for approval.
Do I have a Councillor Pitt?
Yes, happy to second that, Chair, and echo the words that Councillor Smythe has so eloquently spoken. I think we are where we are with this. It's already a site identified for residential development. It's not an over-intensification of the site with 8 properties on there, and we are desperately in need of family housing stock, which again actually was one of the reasons why I was favourable towards the previous development we've seen at Moneyfields, which is also family housing. We're seeing an awful lot of small units coming forward that just barely meet the minimum space standards. It's also handy being on this committee for a long time. We've seen this particular owner in front of us before, and we've seen that some of his developments actually happening, which gives me more confidence that it's going to be done properly, because I've seen him doing it. I've actually spoken to him on site a couple of times at some of those things and said hello. You know, I think for the residents of Exmouth Road, the evidence that I've seen of this particular developer, as I've noticed things that we've passed through planning actually happening, and that they do a good job and do use good quality materials. And I think it is a mixed development site, that particular bit of Exmouth Road. I think those of us who've lived in Portsmouth all our lives remember its gradual evolution over time. And what would be more disappointing, in my opinion, is if it was a pastiche of one of the other bits of Exmouth Road, actually, as they develop it. Yes, colourful houses. So the fact that it is large enough to have its own identity but small enough not to be overly imposing on the other properties means that, and the setback nature of it I think is particularly laudable. So in light of what's there now and what I know from having just viewed the applicant's work elsewhere in the city, I welcome it.
Councillor Stubbs.
And I think we've also got to judge this partly from the previous applications that were refused, and you know, I looked at those when they came in, whenever it was, a year and a half ago, and they were for a substantially larger line of buildings than we, substantially larger line of buildings than we have in front of us today. So I think really you have to look at this a bit as a process of negotiation, because that one didn't go through the usual appeal route, I don't think. So, you know, if we're going to have a process of negotiation, we can't start from that by saying we're automatically, doesn't matter what you come back with, we're going to say no to it at the end. So I think that we have to, you know, we have to sort of incentivise good behaviour, if you like, and I think that the application that we have is substantially improved. I agree with the comments Councillor Pitt made about the design. I really think this is a better way of going than just a pastiche of a Victorian building. And that it's something which will be, I mean, it's a little bit like the development on the old Cambridge pub in that respect, which actually looks really good now that it's in place, and really, you know, there's a much better response to the site, in my view, than just trying to build something rather generic and derivative. So I'm quite happy to support this application.
Councillor Rob Wood.
Yes, Chair. I tend to agree with everybody else. Obviously the objectives there, I did listen to what they said, and I've asked the questions, and I've asked the questions specifically of officers. I'm happy that the response has been appropriate, and therefore some of their worries are mitigated for sure. And I think at the end of the day, this is, now having seen the old design and seen this new design, I would agree that this is much more human scale and in keeping, much more in keeping with the area. And like I say, currently now, having passed that site several times, it doesn't look great as it stands. And I think in time, these will be the, you know, desirable properties of the future. Even though they're of a more modern design, they could be a lot worse. And I don't particularly think that they're a bad design. So, although I have a lot of sympathy because it's on your doorstep and I know that, and I have asked the questions, I'm likely to support the approval of this also.
Okay, can we come to the vote? Those members in favour, please show. That is unanimous. You have been granted planning permission. Thank you. Thank you. And we now move on to our last application today, which is 58 Cromwell Road. I would remind you that you have a a written deputation there from Councillor Winnington. Right. There'll be a 10-minute break.
Exciting design. The way it echoes the kind of industrial quality of the King's Theatre. I really like that.
Because I think they've kind of got
That's really nice.
about them. So,
But I like the feeling of it almost into the industrial quality. It's
taking a long time to get to.
You know, the other developers are horrible. They look like big houses, whereas those look like tall, narrow houses. And that's how it should be.
Are they on your doorstep?
Yeah. Well, no, not in near enough to give an interest, but I'm just on Victoria Road South. So that map of the flood just showed the flood. In fact, it showed a bit of green on in my garden, but the others all.
I mean, those garages have always looked pretty.
Yeah, they don't make the road a good road to walk down, which we want to do all the time.
I mean, many years ago, I used to belong to South Downs Musical Society, and we used to go and sing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sorry, in
the King's Theatre, yeah.
You know, we'd constantly going around the back there.
Yeah.
But so I've been going past that, like you say, it's more notoriously known for trying to park there temporarily.
I mean,
because
parking is terrible around there, and it won't be any better with this development. But at the same time, we just have to make a realistic. It's not a good area for parking, and I think we should get a bit loosen up on the parking. Not, but I mean, 2 spaces maybe is too much. What you don't like is people with 2 spaces parking in front on the road as well. That happens quite often.
To be honest, the design of that, I did see the last one, but now seeing the latest one is much better. And to be honest, it could have been a lot worse. I've seen a lot worse.
I like the design. It echoes the industrial quality of the King's Theatre. I'll tell you what, the other thing about it is, I'm having a lovely week this week because my neighbours have gone away and they're letting me park on their pull-off. And we're just living in an unknown world. It's just fantastic. They go away probably about 6, 8, 10 weeks a year, and they always say use our pull-off because it makes the house look more secure. But it's a happy week for me because we have there's no restrictions around us. But on the other hand, most people are helpful, and they are. Several of our neighbours have got pull-offs, and they all say, in an emergency, you can park across our pull-off, we know it's you. And I think that's what we've got to get a bit slightly more human about it, There's no point in running out.
I'm in
and
Grand
shouting
Parade,
at people.
which by its nature is a big car park,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my biggest thing is, which it always happens to all my cars, is they get dents.
Yes.
Because people just open up
No.
against the door.
No.
So whatever I do, so before you could park on the side, even that is, I've been there long enough now, I've seen a number of cars where they've forgotten to put the handbrake on, and they roll back into the car, causing more damage.
But I think we just have to be kind of quite. It's about sharing space, isn't it? Ultimately, anyway, I wouldn't have said all that today, but I think it's probably all right. It won't be the first.
A bit more reasonable today.
I think they're all polluting the atmosphere outside.
Less than half an hour, then I've got to go.
I know. Yeah, I really should.
I'm off for 3 days now.
You know, I've got to go by, I just go by 4. I've got service and things to look at.
What does he do? Oh, right, okay. I wasn't sure what sort of service he was talking about.
Members, right. I trust you are suitably calm, suitably refreshed, and welcome back. We now come to the application for 58 Cromwell Road. Mrs. Atkins, would you please come to the table? Can we have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I would just like to bring your attention to the SMART report, which details additional objection comments received since the publication of the committee report, and also comments from Councillors Winnington and Councillors Brent, who have apologised that they cannot attend today's meeting. There is an appendix to the rear of the SMART report which details their comments in full. The application relates to number 58 Cromwell Road, better known as the ORMA Tavern, which is located on a prominent corner junction between Cromwell Road and Toker Street. The site is occupied currently by a 3-storey public house with living accommodation above and ancillary extensions and outbuildings to the rear. The proposal seeks the conversion of the building to form 4 flats, the construction of a new dwelling to the west of the site, and associated parking and landscaping and boundary treatments. The above slide just highlights some of the images of the existing site. The ORMA building straddles the corner junction and has 2 prominent elevations. To the rear of the building, numerous extensions and other alterations and outbuildings have been constructed over time. And the previously converted Eastney Cellars pub is directly opposite the application site. You're more than aware of the pub. And further to the west then is number 1 Toker Street, which adjoins the application site. These slides just indicate the sort of the current internal conditions of the property. It's become very dilapidated and in a poor state of repair since it's become vacant. As mentioned, the proposal is for the conversion of the existing building to form 4 flats. No extensions have been proposed to the actual ORMA building to enable this development. To the west of the site, you have a 3-bedroom dwelling, Centrally within the site you have 5 car parking spaces, and this would be provided alongside access to bin and bicycle storage for the property. The local highways authority have also indicated that the provision of vehicle and cycle parking is acceptable in this case. Landscaping and boundary treatments have been proposed to integrate the development into its immediate surroundings. This slide demonstrates how the property would be laid out at ground floor. The RMA Tavern would accommodate 2 one-bedroom flats at ground floor. You would have a cycle store for 6 bicycles, and you would also have a refuse and recycle store. And the proposed dwelling to the west then would have an open plan kitchen, living and space at WC, as well as access to a rear garden measuring approximately 50 metres squared. Again, secure bin and bicycle storage to the rear of this dwelling. The first floor would be laid out then in the RMA to accommodate 1 2-bedroom flat, and it's the same as the second floor. The first and second floors then of the new dwelling would have 2 bedrooms and then a 3rd bedroom located in the roof space. The proposed new flats would all meet the minimum required floor areas as required by the nationally described space standard. There will be a fractional shortfall of 2 metres squared in the floor area of the proposed new dwelling. However, based on the merits of the scheme, this is considered to be acceptable and would provide a suitable standard of living accommodation for future occupiers. Externally, alterations to the RMA have been limited to replacement conservation style windows, installation of doors and paint treatment. The proposed new dwelling then to the west of the site will be constructed from matching brickwork, concrete roof tiles and white UPVC windows. All materials would be conditioned to ensure proper quality. A new boundary treatment has been proposed onto Toker Street, which would form a brick wall and piers with powder-coated black railings, and also a new tree would be planted in the rear garden of the dwelling. This slide demonstrates the rear and side elevations of the new dwelling and the RMA. Again, alterations to the RMA in itself would be fairly limited. This would be access into the cycle storage. The LPA has been engaged with the applicant regarding cosmetic design amendments to make the scheme more acceptable. The revised scheme would abut the new dwelling to the gable wall of number 1 Toker Street, and would align the eaves of the 2 properties, and would remove rear-facing dormer windows to be replaced with skylights. The proposed design alterations are considered to integrate the new dwelling within its surroundings and provide a continuation of the terrace of properties on Toker Street. The amended design is considered to be acceptable in this regard. Further to the removal of dormer windows at second floor level, the amended proposal is not considered to have a significant impact on neighbouring amenity by virtue of a loss of privacy or a loss of natural light or a greater sense of overlooking. In conclusion, the amended scheme as presented to officers is considered to be visually acceptable and would not have an impact on adjoining heritage assets. The internal arrangement of floor spaces would provide an adequate standard of living accommodation for future occupiers. The layout and provision of vehicle and bicycle parking is considered to be acceptable to the local highways authority, and the amended scheme is considered to overcome previous concerns regarding reasons for refusal under a previously refused scheme. In light of these changes and for the reasons outlined in the Planning Committee report, the recommendation is for conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Adkins, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I needed to come because I'm the next door neighbour to this site and I'll be the most affected. I do completely object to an extra 3-bedroom house as well as 4 new large flats in an already cramped part of Cromwell Road. I am most concerned about the new house proposed immediately next to mine, which will abut my eastern boundary wall, which is not a party wall. The house will create substantial shadow into the street, so everyone will lose daylight into the road for good. There has never been a domestic residence there before, and an extra house as well as 4 large flats is overkill because there are already 25 flats in 100 metres in that stretch of Cromwell Road. The house does not meet the legal size standard. The proposal would make a total of at least 30 flats in just 100 metres, and I worry there will be another bedsit patch in Southsea. 58 Cromwell Road was built 50 years before my house, and it has its own boundary wall. The site owners have no right to use the outer wall of my house. They have assumed they have the right to abut a new house against my eastern boundary wall, and this is not correct. I am here today to state on record that I will never give the necessary permission for this to proceed. All the houses on the west side of Cromwell Road have the same length back garden with no building obstructions to block the daylight into the gardens. Of all the property conversions on Cromwell Road, no one has ever proposed to build a two-storey house at the far end of their back garden. There has never been a domestic residence on the east side of my house before. My house is number 1, it's the first house in the street, and it should remain so. The current gap in the terraced houses is mirrored on both sides of the street to ensure maximum light can enter the road, and this gap should be maintained. The new house will change the symmetry of the terraced houses forever. It will cast substantial shadow into the street. It will become permanently darker for everyone. The design is not in keeping with the Victorian terraces built in the 1890s. Any extra buildings should adjoin 58 Cromwell Road and not my home. This would mirror the Eastney Cellars development and therefore not block any light into Tokar Street. Every area of my living space will be impacted by the new house. The proposed kitchen will adjoin my hall and lounge. Their lounge will be immediately next to my kitchen. The 2 first floor bedrooms will match up to my bedrooms, and the noise from the 3rd bedroom in the loft will overspill onto all areas on my 1st floor. I will be overlooked by the new house, their bedroom windows into my back garden. I will lose my privacy along with a substantial amount of light into my garden. Every area of my home will be invaded by the new house, and I will never give the consent they need for this house to be built adjoining my property. I have repeatedly asked for a gap to be left so that I can treat and maintain my eastern boundary wall. This request has been completely ignored. The new house will cause me significant stress. Please put yourself in my place and imagine a new house being built immediately next to your home. Not just the inevitable building work, but the everyday life of 5 people living immediately next door where there has never been a domestic home before. I bought my home because I have long-term health conditions and I only have one immediate neighbour at number 3. Please do not let this proposal go through and ruin my health and peace by the overbearing impact of the new noise of 5 people living immediately next to me and the loss of privacy and light into my garden. The proposed 1st floor back bedroom windows are invasive and much closer than the other neighbours. Please refuse the building of a new house due to loss of light, loss of privacy, overbearing impact, overbearing noise, bulk and on civil litigation grounds. I am taking legal action to prevent any new permanent building at the site from adjoining my house. Tokar Street is all family homes. My neighbours are working families with up to 4 school children, and we need to be able to park close to our homes. The top end of Cromwell Road has houses on both sides of the street with no parking spaces at all, so we already have an overspill situation. Please remember we will lose at least 1 space on the street to accommodate the car park entrance, and the 5-space car park won't be large enough for 4 flats designed for 11 people, let alone a new house for a further 5. So an already chronic parking situation is going to be made even worse. The report you've received says the parking demand significantly exceeds the space available. Please do not allow this application to proceed. There are over 20 public objections to this proposal and not 1 supporting public comment. There are no communal outdoor space provided for the 4 flats. The flats will become damp because there's no outdoor space to dry clothes and no communal green space. This suggests a lack of concern for the health and well-being of the future residents, and therefore I believe this current application is not a quality development. The extra noise and traffic as the new 16 residents come and go will be overwhelming. Please remember there would be 30 flats and a new house crammed into 100 metres on Cromwell Road, as well as family homes and shops. There will be a huge impact of noise, traffic and road safety if this application proceeds. Cars already whiz up and down Cromwell Road and lorries use it as a route through Eastney. Please do not permit this overdevelopment. I beg you all to refuse this application. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a few questions just about this whole boundary wall, party wall issue, and about what is relevant to our planning decision and what is a private matter. So, I mean, I'm sort of less clear than I was actually just after hearing it. I thought I knew the position, and then the deputy is sort of, I'm not quite so sure now. So, in terms of the planning decision, the party wall issue, the fact that the deputy doesn't want this, has control over the wall, I assume, and can block this, is not a part of the planning decision. Is that right?
That's correct. So the applicant has fulfilled everything they need to do in terms of the planning application. In regards to the party wall issue, a party wall act will be required prior to the commencement of any development. The Party Wall Act isn't enforced by the local planning authority, and any grievances associated with the Party Wall Act are supposed to be resolved within the terms of that act or via private legal action between the two parties.
And what does that mean? When we looked at the previous application, I don't think it actually came up in a discussion, but in our pre-meeting about it, there was a discussion about how that would touch King's Mews, and somehow you've got a double-skinned wall, effectively. So you've got a new wall which is separate, but it just so happens to touch the other wall. I mean, is that something which Mrs. Atkins has the option of blocking, basically, or not? Do they have to leave a gap if she insists on a gap?
Essentially, as part of the party wall agreement, notice must be served 2 months in advance. The notice itself, then, the affected party, Mrs. Atkins, then would have a chance within 14 days to either agree that consent or object to it and suggest additional construction if needs be. If that cannot be resolved or formally agreed to, then the advice from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors is to employ a surveyor each and see if it can be resolved amicably between the two parties.
Another question, another matter, if that's okay, which is to do with parking. So in the report it says that the parking standard is 6.5 spaces for this particular mix of units, and the provision is 5. It also says that the existing use of the building includes a 6-bedroom flat, which would itself have a demand of 2. So my question is, what are you assessing the 5 parking spaces against? Are you measuring it against a demand for 6.5 spaces, or are you netting that off and assessing it against 4.5 spaces?
Perhaps Peter Hayward would be able to.
We're measuring that against the net effect on the highway. So at the moment there's a 2-space shortfall associating with the site, and as effect of this proposal there'll be a 1.5 space shortfall associated with the site. So there's a net improvement in parking provision.
Councillor Pitt.
Does that take into consideration the loss of the on-street car parking space that's got to be provided in order for them to gain access to that car park?
No, it doesn't. That would change it to another 1/2 space, which wouldn't cause me a problem in terms of my recommendation to you.
Okay.
Councillor Smythe.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if in the negotiation of this application there was consideration made about the possibility of having a planning permission for the conversion of the pub, because let's face it, there are a lot of pubs closing, and we will have, as a city, to provide different alternative uses for those corner pubs that are quite typical of the Portsmouth streetscape without the dwelling house. We have seen, places in other cities and indeed in Portsmouth where people have, as it were, crammed in quite a small dwelling into spaces like this, and I wondered if the applicant had been involved in discussions about just limiting this to the 4 flats, maybe possibly 4 flats with maybe even some form of a back extension on the ground floor, which would be possible to enlarge one of those, and leaving the existing open space between that and number 1 Toker Street free of a dwelling, and that could enable the shortfall in parking to be addressed as well.
In terms of negotiations around amendments, as opposed to asking the applicant to reconsider the entire design of the scheme, we, based on the submitted plans, we asked them to make minor cosmetic changes. So therefore we haven't asked them to remove the dwelling. The application came in for the conversion of the pub for 4 apartments and a new dwelling, but we haven't we haven't sought for the removal of that dwelling, essentially.
It does seem to me that looking at the plans, it would be possible, in lines with the kind of footprint and the land use before, and it's not that easy living next door to a pub actually, but there could be a reconfiguration that would probably allow them enough return. Since one can sympathise with the Ms Atkins about the completely new dwelling built and the lack of parking that will result.
The applicant hasn't indicated a willingness to lose the dwelling. The local planning authority has assessed the application on its merits, and in this case, in light of the minor cosmetic tweaks to the design of the standalone dwelling, we consider it to be acceptable as a whole, and therefore that's why the recommendation is for permission.
Councillor Oodie, Councillor Pitt, Councillor Stubbs.
With the dwelling house, which would be right next to 1 Tokar Street, have they submitted any materials? Is it going to look like the buildings along there? I know they're probably all kind of like 2 up, 2 downs, late 1800s, early 1900s, kind of.
Because of the prominence of the site adjacent to a conservation area and a number of listed buildings within East Neath Barracks, we have worked quite extensively with the applicant to secure good materials in principle. So the new dwelling would be constructed of matching brickwork and concrete roof tiles. You would also have window header and sill details, all of which would have to be approved by condition to maintain that commitment to high quality materials. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The conversion of the cellars opposite, there's no off-road parking provision behind it, is there?
No.
Purely so that we understand what we're looking at here, why has that got no off-road parking provision, and this is, we're arguing about spaces here?
Forgive me, I wasn't the case officer for the planning application. I'm unsure. I can't answer that question at this point.
None of us were, but I suspect it was not possible to provide parking spaces in connection with that site, and therefore we made that judgment of, do we want to deliver the homes without parking, or do we want to leave the site without a use because of that lack of parking?
But is it fair to say that the fact that that went ahead with no on-site parking provision at all has already increased the on-street pressure in the area?
I think we could safely conclude that that would be the case unless those occupants are non-car owners.
Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the windows on the house, because a number of points have been made about the materials and so on, so implying that it's because it's coming towards the boundary of the conservation area is quite a sensitive location. And just to look at the pictures there, and I don't know how accurate these are of the existing houses rather than the proposed ones, the windows don't quite, they're near, but they're not quite the same.
Yeah, I mean, the drawing of the surrounding dwellings isn't, the most accurate in terms of fine detailing. In terms of the windows, they actually have been increased in size to try and match adjoining dwellings as best as possible. They are dictated to a certain extent by floor-to-ceiling levels, and again, it's a question that I had put to the architect, and this is the closest match that they can get to adjoining dwellings.
Councillor Pitt.
Purely to assist Councillor Stubbs, being intimately acquainted with that road, the windows being suggested for the house abutting 1 Tokar Street look absolutely nothing like the other houses in Tokar Street.
There we have it from the horse's mouth, as it were. Councillor Wood.
I've just been pondering about the conservation thing, so I understand where the conservation is. I'm familiar with the area, but not familiar with the boundaries of it. And what I am concerned about is this plonked on the end of a block, opposite a block that is obviously consistent, whereas in my mind's eye, if it shifted left as I see it here, so the gap was maintained between the two, seems to be a resolution without it being abutted to effectively a terrace of houses that are very consistently of a certain age. Where's the boundary? Where's the...
The reason for shifting the property further to the west was, again, when we were considering this and looking at the merits of the scheme, we believed that this gap in here would represent some issues in terms of maintenance of both properties. It can lead to the build-up of rubbish and debris within that gap. We felt that abutting the property to number 1 Toker Street would provide some continuation of the terrace of properties and would avoid unnecessary gaps in the urban green. It's also allowed the eaves and the ridge line to be matched up better. So opposed to a standalone dwelling with an awkward eaves relationship to number 1 Tokar Street, we have tried to get them to match as closely as possible.
Sorry, can I just add a little bit to that? Looking at the parking layout, the distances and the area is really quite tight. So any movement of the house towards the existing building would actually challenge your ability to provide parking within the site.
Councillor Hooper. Sorry, I'll come back to you.
Given these are sort of late Victorian, Edwardian, I guess, properties, is there any danger of any damage being done to the integrity of Mrs. Atkins' wall? Is that being tested in any way? Can we actually test that?
It's not a matter for planning to consider, but certainly, if planning permission is granted and the relevant consent is given, that would be something that would be controlled under building regulations to ensure structural integrity, yeah.
Councillor Wood.
Sorry, in asking the previous questions, and although you gave me an answer about the building itself, I still don't understand the conservation constraints in this area. So is a conservation area, are the buildings considered conservation? So I'm just trying to understand
the application site isn't located in a conservation area. There are no specific designated heritage assets, including the ORMA or any of the adjoining buildings. I believe the boundaries for the conservation area are very much within the confines of Marine Gate and the Royal Navy Barracks.
Just to pick up the question I asked before, I mean, I think it is tight. I think developing these corner pub sites is difficult, and it's important that they are put back into some use because they can become an eyesore. But I'm really don't like this new house attached to the old terrace. I think there would be room to put a little bit more development abutting against the pub using that lower extension that's already there, and I'm surprised that didn't come up in pre-planning discussions, and I would be minded to you can't refuse it's a one planning application to refuse planning application, so that proper consideration of doing something slightly different with the right-hand elevation from the north of the pub rather than having the house.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting being in the rather unique situation of having no particular interest as such here, but having stood outside on the corner running the door for my place for more years than I care to think of in all weathers, I'm probably better acquainted with the exterior of those buildings than any other living individual, which is not necessarily a good thing. But looking at this, there's a number of issues that I have that I'd like to ask about. The reverse parking onto the road, the reversing out of parking onto Tokar Street, is necessary because of the size of the garden that's been allocated to the house that's proposed to abut 1 Tokar Street. If the garden was smaller, which is a choice the developer's making, then it would be much more viable to have the cars able to turn round and exit forward facing. I say that because having stood on that street corner for many, many, many hours, the speed at which vehicles come from Cromwell Road into Tokar Street, as Miss Atkins will be very well aware, is often terrifying. On a number of occasions I've had to grab hold of enthusiastic youngsters who were oblivious to the fact they were standing in the middle of a road at the end of the night and drag them onto the pavement. That there is a real danger of vehicles reversing out of there, being hit head-on by a vehicle. It looks like it's quite a long way down the road. It's actually not. It's probably 2.5, 3 car lengths of somebody just smacking straight into somebody reversing out of there. It's a relatively narrow entrance that's being created. I can't stress enough how many times I have seen a car take that corner at 20 miles an hour plus and narrowly miss the flipping Rolls-Royce and Boat & Co. that used to be parked there for many moons, and it's been dangerous on a number of occasions. So I just wonder if it's possible to say whether we can have any control over the size of that garden area being allocated. Is it a reasonable thing for a developer to do? Because we often look at the size of rooms, we very rarely look at the size of a garden, and I'm just wondering whether there's any opportunity to push back around reconfiguring the car park and reducing the size of the garden.
Okay, in terms of just looking at the plan, you could take the two, and you've got enough room to then put them in parallel with the bottom two and lose that chunk of garden. You'd have to then relocate the bin and cycle store, and I suspect it probably would be a sort of bit of a backwards forwards to actually get out, leaving the site in forward gear. Probably it's 4 manoeuvres, but I don't know because I was just using my pen to assess that. So we'll agree 4 manoeuvres then. So that is achievable. That isn't, though, something that you could deal with by condition. It would have to be a deferral to go back to the applicant to see whether they were willing to amend the scheme in that way.
If you went... If you went with the idea of reconfiguring the site to possibly add a flat or extend one of the flats, or leave it as it is now, you could get over that problem too.
Councillor Pitt.
Sorry, Chair. Moving on to the actual proposed conversion of the RMA, Royal Marines Artillery Tavern. On the proposed ground floor plan, there appears to be a living diner. I love the way people just keep putting slashes in front of things now to incorporate everything into saying it's a bed sit by any other name. Living dining kitchen apartment thingy at the front, which then appears to go into a corridor with no natural light, which leads to the bedroom. So the bathroom has no natural light at all and is entirely internal to the building. We got any idea how the steam's getting out?
Details around extraction fans haven't been submitted at this point, but yes, there is no window into the bathroom of apartment 1.
Is it fair to say that there's no window into apartment 2 either?
Into the bathroom, yes, but the main habitable areas are considered to provide a decent standard of light ventilation and outlook.
Okay, but and I always judge planning applications by the level of detail that we see in other planning applications. Is it fair to say that on most applications we would have some indication as to where the ventilation was happening? Certainly on HMOs we always do.
It's not necessarily a plan requirement. I know that sometimes drawings come through with a lot more detail on them because they might be used, for instance, for building regulation purposes, but it's certainly not a requirement at this stage.
Members, are there any other questions? Comments, please. Councillor Pitt.
Okay, I'll wade in. Obviously, although I no longer had any interest in the place, I did take an interest in looking at what was happening with the cellars when it was being converted on the opposite side of the road. And I was very interested to see the single-storey extension that went onto the back of the building that we've seen. And that has enabled a really key piece of the amenity in that area to be retained, which is the way that light interacts with the road. So you've got the seller's side on there, have you? No. But directly opposite where the extension, the single-storey extension is called the gun room, and you can just about see the white door surround for it on the bottom left and top left pictures, and also there on the top right. So there's a door that's at the end of the low building, which is the entrance into the gun room. That whole area is mirrored on the other side of the road, and because there's only a single-storey extension, it means that light has a clear path through. Now, when you read the report, it says that the previous proposal that was put forward was thought to be an over-intensification because it reduced that completely out, but now it's only taking half of it out. So I guess what we have to decide as a committee is it okay that before it took 100% of that light amenity away and now it's only taking half? When you also roll into it the consideration that no parking spaces were required for the conversion of the cellars, which has added an additional, well, there's 5 flats in there, so 6.5 spaces, is that right, Mr Hayward? Yeah, so 6.5 spaces there. This doesn't quite meet the parking standards either. There's no parking on large sections of Cromwell. In fact, there's none at all on the eastern side of Cromwell Road, and there's limited parking on the other side. These are small, narrow streets. It's called Eastney Village for a reason. It's got that feel to it. I can't see any issues at all with converting the pub, and if people want bathrooms without outside light, then that's up to them. But I can't see any reason at all for not converting the pub, and in fact, to knock the pub down would fundamentally change that area. There's a real sense of purpose. I mean, you look at things, Cockleshell Heroes films, that is captured in that. The Marines used to march, Royal Marines used to march in and out of the main gate there. The pub both pubs have historic context and are recorded going back 100 or more years. So to see the building retained, I think, is a real bonus. Converting it to flats is a bonus. That's great. Sticking a random house on the end of a Victorian terrace is a whole different kettle of fish, and that's a developer's choice to try and do that. Now, Councillor Stubbs is right. The party wall issue is an entirely separate legal matter that you would have to fight out elsewhere. However, I think that when you say that it reduces half of the light amenity, and its presence also means that the off-street car parking provision is, in my opinion, dangerous, I can't support this application as it currently stands.
You're therefore proposing refusal on those grounds.
I am indeed.
Councillor Smythe, Councillor Stubbs, Councillor Wood. Oh, you're seconding the form, just formally seconding it at this point.
This is going to do the same, and I'm sorry I made my comments in the wrong place in the meeting.
Okay, Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of various aspects to this application, aren't there? And certainly, as far as the existing building is concerned, I mean, the landlord didn't actually want to move out. It was one of these things where a developer bought it, and while he wanted to stay on and wanted to carry on paying rent and so forth, that wasn't an option that he had. And I think that's a shame, although it's nothing that we can do anything about. It's a privately owned building. You can, just in the same way, if you own a house and you're renting that out, you can say, I don't want a tenant, I want to keep it empty. It's your choice. But I still think it's a shame, and I do, lament it. The conversion of the building, I think the job actually looks not bad, really. I mean, there's a lot of former pubs in Portsmouth. Some of the conversions have been really quite shoddy. Some of them have been very good. This does look better than many of them, so it preserves a feel of the building, and that's a positive thing. And I have to say, as someone with a bathroom without a window in it, it's not a problem. The other aspects of it, I mean, if you compare this to the conversion of the cellars, which is the difficult bit, is the parking. So you can almost say the other way you could go is basically not to have any off-street parking at all, and to have something more reflective of what's happened on the cellars. Trouble is then you lose all the parking, and from our perspective as the planning authority, is parking something we can insist on even more of? Probably it isn't. I mean, the way planning works really is where you've got wholly new developments and you can insist on parking standards. Where it's constrained because it's existing buildings and very tight sites and so on, then if we more or less the parking has to take second place to actually achieving the development. And while we on this committee might not agree with that, that is the view of the planning inspector, as has been shown many times. So I'd be loath to lose the parking, but I do share the concerns about the new house. It doesn't look, you know, you tack an extra house on the end of a line, it never looks quite right. And there are party wall issues and so forth. I'm not so convinced about reconfiguring the parking areas because I think you end up with the same number of bays in there at the end. You've still got 5 as far as I can make out. And you lose the tree, and the tree is actually a nice touch in this development. I mean, that is something which, you know, you don't normally get that, and I know it's only fairly minor as a part of the whole thing, but it's still a nice to have. So, yes, I would also like to see this application refused. I don't think we can deal with the location of the house and some of a deferment. It's too much of a change, so it's going to have to be a refusal.
Were we to vote for it to be refused, one other element which I would put in there is the inconsistent fenestration on the new building. That it is, I know the street. It's a consistent line of windows, and this one does not fit. And so I would suggest that on design grounds we might be object to it as well. Were we to object. But we've got one proposal before us which is for rejection on a number of grounds.
Can I just...
Yep.
Sorry, just can I go through the grounds to make sure that once you vote that we have clarity on the reasons for refusal. I'm reading from members that we're saying that it's an unacceptable form of development that would be out of keeping with the street scene and the general amenity of the area, and that the design and fenestration seems consistent with the urban character of the area and therefore would be contrary to policy PCS 23 as one reason. The second reason, I think, is that you're trying to look at a highway safety reason. Can I advise members that we do have the Highway Authority here and they are not raising a highway safety reason for refusal. And obviously the danger for us as a committee if we ended up with a reason for refusal that related to highway safety grounds, in the absence of any technical evidence to substantiate that reason for refusal, there would be a risk that wouldn't be able to be defended at appeal, and we could end up to be seen to be unreasonable in that reason for refusal. So is there another issue around the configuration of the space that is in line with the way and the form the development's been presented to us, rather than the specific issue around highway safety that, as members, you're trying to articulate to me that I haven't quite picked up on?
Earlier, I think it is overdevelopment trying to put a house in that position. I don't think it would be overdevelopment to extend possibly some of the flats on the flat conversion, but that would be for the applicant to decide later on. So I think overdevelopment is one there, and I also think that the parking we've already talked about is potentially inadequate, although I appreciate that wouldn't stand up on its own, particularly given the precedents in other developments, but it would certainly be a reason that we are concerned about.
I understand the comments of Claire on this, but if Mr Hayward and I have to go head-to-head at an appeal, talking about our various justifications, I think my presence of being there for 18 years, watching vehicle movement behaviour in that particular area, a rather unique situation, might just carry some credibility, and I'm happy to represent the authority from the appeal on that grounds if required.
Councillor Stubbs.
Yeah, I mean, I do share some nervousness about bringing up the highway safety angle, because the obvious resolution is to take all the parking out. And, you know, if we're saying to the developer that it's such a constrained site and so on that you can't provide, that it's too dangerous to have parking connecting onto this road, then they'll just take all the parking out. And as we've already seen in other developments, that is, we're not going to be able to stop the conversion of a building on the grounds that it doesn't have parking. So it would just go ahead without any parking in it. So I have concerns about that.
Would you comment on that, please, Claire?
Yeah, I mean, if it was a reason for refusal, then yes, they could come back with another scheme, taking the parking out, and then again we would be in quite a weak position. So again, I'm wondering whether there is a way of looking at that constrained parking arrangement in the context of it being a cramped form of development, rather than running it as a highway safety reason for refusal.
Claire?
The bin and cycle storage in the housing proposal, the back gate, what's the space between the car and the bit of pavement? Because you would assume that a wheelie bin's coming out with there. So just that little space next to House 1 car park.
Yes, I'm not keen on that either.
Because it doesn't look like very much, and if there's a car park there, you might not be able to really manoeuvre. Could you?
I can get a measurement here for you if you just want to leave it with me. 2 seconds.
Okay.
But does this just maybe reinforce the fact that you're thinking that that spatial arrangement between the buildings is cramped for the activities that you're going to be putting within that space?
You won't get a wheelie bin out.
Yeah. So does that just reinforce that reason for refusal around that space being too cramped to serve the level of development that you're seeing in front of you?
Actually, on a related point, I mean, I'm assuming we're not talking about the refuse truck being able to enter this site, and if we're not, then you've got 2 Euro bins just inside the building, which is a fair way, and people don't push those things out. So how does the bins get entered?
The measurement of that paving slab there is approximately 700 mil. I have been in consultation with the waste management officer, and there doesn't seem to be an issue from his perspective in terms of waste collection.
Oh really? It's a bit crap now, isn't it?
I'd just like to reiterate the overdevelopment point, because I think the internal cycle store and the internal bin refuse, it's horrible having refuse at the bottom of your stairs and it being inside the building. So it's all evidence for me that supports the overdevelopment of the site.
It's not managed.
Although I wouldn't object to some, contrary to other people, I don't think this layout is particularly nice. I think they could do better and possibly gain something which would compensate for the loss of the house.
Any other comments? Members, we have a proposal in front of us to reject the... We have a proposal in front of us to reject the application. Can I see all who support the rejection? That is unanimous. It is rejected. That concludes this afternoon's entertainment. Thank you for the courtesy you've shown to the chair, and it's still light.
Just turn off the